Chapter 114. When Mary woke up again, it was already a month later. This time, she had consumed the blood of a powerful being, and the energy level was far higher than her vampire rank. She had no choice but to continuously sleep to digest such a powerful blood energy. Of course, this was also one of the innate abilities of the vampires. If it was any other creature, it would easily contaminate the direction of their bloodline if they swallowed such a large amount of energy in one go. However, the vampire race was different. No matter how much energy they swallowed after digesting it, it would all become nourishment for their vampire bloodline, and there would never be a situation where their bloodline would be contaminated. However, this evolution was obviously different from the past. When Mary woke up from her deep sleep, she even felt that she was about to die of hunger. She could not help but turn pale with fright. In the past, when she needed to sleep after swallowing blood energy, the biggest feeling she had when she woke up was the feeling of fullness and satisfaction in her bloodline. But today, for some reason, after swallowing all the blood of a wizard-level monster leader, the moment she woke up, she actually felt hungry again, and it was the kind of hunger that rumbled in her stomach. This feeling came from the deepest part of her bloodline. It was as if this evolution, the speed of her bloodline evolution, was even faster and more sudden than the evolution of her physical attributes. Could it be that the blood of the flower spirit had hidden factors that could promote the evolution of bloodline? With a deep question, Mary licked her lips and opened her eyes. This was not her room. There was someone in the room. Mary silently sat up from the bed, and her scarlet eyes fell straight on a tall and burly figure. This was Grimm's room, but the person sitting in front of the desk reading in silence was obviously not him. That broad and burly body was unfamiliar, but that familiar soul wave, that familiar body aura. Wait, no. Why was there a hint of pungent sulfur mixed in the familiar smell? Mary's body silently floated up, and in just a flash, she appeared behind the familiar stranger. The nails on her hands quickly grew and became strangely sharp as blood flashed. Her scarlet eyes stared at the neck of the stranger, which was right in front of her, and she could bite it at any time. A series of crisp sounds rang out. Two items that were originally on Mary's body fell to the ground along with her movement, emitting a crisp sound. Hearing the sound, the burly figure turned around. The moment he saw Mary, his face lit up with joy. "You're awake." His smile was sincere and brimming with joy. Mary stopped her attack. Her blood-red eyes narrowed into slits as she coldly asked, "Who are you? Why do you smell like Grimm?" Seeing how nervous Mary was, Grimm didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that both of them had changed so much in this deep sleep that Mary began to doubt her own eyes. Grimm stood up from his chair. He used to be almost the same size as Mary, but now he was a head taller, coupled with his broad and burly physique. When the two of them stood facing each other, the pressure from Grimm's body forced Mary to take a step back subconsciously. The best way to judge a person is through their soul. "What's wrong, Mary? Can't you feel my soul?" Grimm asked calmly. At this moment, he didn't want to provoke her too much. Mary was like a female leopard on full alert, ready to pounce at any moment. Although Grimm was confident in himself due to the sudden increase in his strength, he was afraid that even 5 of him would not be able to fight against a vampire quasi-sorcerer in such a small place. Indeed, Grimm's senses were very sharp. Mary was now a quasi-witch vampire. According to the classification of vampires in books, Mary should have a noble title by now. This title did not refer to the ranking system of the nobles in the human kingdom, but to the strength of the vampires. Since the vampires like to hide in the human society, they disguise themselves as nobles to hide their true colors. Therefore, they basically followed the ranking system of the human nobles. With Mary's current rank as a vampire, she could probably be considered a baron. Vampire, knight, baron, viscount, earl, marquis, duke, grand duke, prince. This series was the ranking system of the vampires. However, the rank of the bloodline and the strength were sometimes not directly proportional. For example, Mary's vampire bloodline was a baron, but her strength was a quasi-wizard. If she met a direct descendant of an orthodox vampire family, it was very likely that he would have the title of Viscount, while his strength was still at the intermediate level. This title did not mean much to the other races except for vampires, but it had indescribable benefits for the vampires. At the very least, when the intermediate Viscount vampire faced Mary, it was very likely that he would use the suppression of his bloodline to forcibly enslave Mary to become his slave. As for whether it would succeed or not, it would depend on the strength of their willpower and the suppression of their bloodlines. Mary once again looked at Grimm in confusion and could not help but sniff his scent. It was indeed Grimm's soul fluctuation. After confirming this, the tension on Mary's face eased a little bit. But where did the pungent smell of sulfur and the sweet taste come from? Once again, Mary moved closer to Grimm's body and opened her red lips, intending to take a small bite to savor the taste. However, just as her little canine teeth were about to reach Grimm's neck, they were suddenly deflected by a small burst of flame. Mary swayed slightly in the air and once again came to Grimm's side. She stared unblinkingly at the small flame that had suddenly appeared on Grimm's neck. This was a golden flame the size of a fingernail. It quietly floated on Grimm's skin and burned without the crackling sound of ordinary flames. After a few seconds, perhaps it did not sense any hostility or attack from the outside, the flame drilled into Grimm's skin and disappeared. Only then did Mary understand that the flame was not summoned by Grimm. It was an instinctive reaction of the body to guard against it. Mary curiously stretched out a finger and pressed on the part of Grimm's neck that was burning. This time, it was very strange. Her smooth finger rubbed on Grimm's skin for a long time, but there was no flame. Mary was stunned at first, then she seemed to understand something. A cold, murderous aura burst forth. Mary's fingernail rapidly grew and crackled. The tip of her fingernail had become abnormally sharp under the infusion of blood energy. Almost at the same time, a golden flame suddenly rose from where Mary's finger was pressed on Grimm's neck and directly ignited her finger. Mary raised her hand and looked at it curiously. The flame had unexpectedly left Grimm's body and stubbornly burned on her fingertip, causing her continuous damage. Mary spat out blood from her fingertip and quickly extinguished the flame with her blood energy. Only then did she turn her head to look at Grimm. "What's this? It looks pretty good." "A combination of body of flame and flame shield." "How did you get the smell of sulfur in your body?" "It's a side effect from soaking in the underground lava. I'm trying to get rid of it." "Soaking the underground lava?" "You have to know that you slept for 32 days. Grimm spread his hands helplessly. "A lot of things happened during this period. You need to slowly understand them. Then tell me from the beginning." Mary's little face scrunched up. "I want to listen to you while I eat." In the next 2 hours, Mary continuously ate 5 mana-set meals before she could barely quench the hunger in the depths of her soul. Grimm, on the other hand, sat by the side and watched her wolfing down the food, while recounting what happened during this period of time in a clear and organized manner. Of course, Grimm only told her everything that had happened. As for the speculations and suspicions he had in the cave, he did not say a single word. After all, this was the Magus Tower controlled by the other side. Who knew if the Grade 2 Magus Andre was still watching them? For safety reasons, he decided to keep this secret by himself. When Mary finally stopped eating, Grimm handed her the 2 gifts again. Mary touched the exquisite armor and magic bow in confusion and raised her head, waiting for Grimm's explanation. "These 2 were originally flower spirit equipment. Now that I've modified them, you can use your blood energy to control them. You lacked long-range attacks in the past, but now that you have these 2, you've made up for that." It had to be said that Grimm hated Mary's crude method of using the power of her bloodline. She had such a great talent for vampires, but she still used such an old-fashioned method of fighting like a mad dog, exchanging blood for blood with the enemy. If she met an enemy who could suppress her blood-sucking regeneration talent, she would be courting death. Now that she had the rose armor, she could make up for her weak skin. With the blood-red magic bow, she could also make up for her lack of long-range attacks. In the future, she could use her high agility to slowly wear down the enemy's attacks and defenses. If she really needed to fight in close combat, she could also give up on the magic bow and use cruel claws to entangle the enemy. This way, there would be both long-range and melee attacks, as well as the necessary defense. Only then could Mary's battle strength be fully unleashed. During this time, Grimm was not idle. After modifying Mary's equipment, Grimm spent the rest of his time on mastering fire element spells and repairing magic puppets. The Host of Flame was just a basic step in his path to specialize in fire spells. Although it did not give Grimm direct battle strength, it was the biggest support for all fire spells. For example, the fusion of Host of Flame and Flame Shield would allow Grimm to passively activate fire protection. Any actions that hurt his body at close range would automatically be counterattacked by the flames, dealing 3 to 5 damage. Chapter 115. Over the past few days, Grimm had been researching the high-temperature force field. He had already completed all the knowledge he had about the high-temperature force field and could now maintain it for 10 minutes. However, there were still many problems that needed to be solved when it came to the fusion of the Host of Flame and the high-temperature force field. According to Grimm's best idea, he wanted to extend his body's passive fire damage reflection to the force field. This way, any enemy that entered his force field would be continuously injured by the flames of the void. This was equivalent to a small-scale flame force field. Grimm estimated that if he wanted to completely master the flame force field, he would need to become an official magus at the very least. Right now, he wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to fuse the Host of Flame and the high-temperature force field to achieve a similar effect as the flame force field. However, to achieve this, he still needed a lot of magic knowledge to analyze, and he also needed to optimize the control of the high-temperature force field. In short, most of his energy was used for the AI chip's heavy calculations, and Grimm could only do some simple reading, meditation, and repair magic puppets. In the previous battle in the magical forest, Grimm's team of magic puppets had suffered heavy losses. The lightning giant had lost 2 auxiliary crystal cores, and as long as it was replenished, it could immediately recover its battle strength. As for the 3 magic puppets, 2 of them had already been destroyed and could not be repaired. Hence, during this period of time, apart from hiding in his residence to research related spells, Grimm spent the rest of his time in the alchemy laboratory. The magic gems seized from the underground had been successfully exchanged for a large number of magic crystals and suitable witchcraft equipment for Grimm through Cabby's enthusiastic promotion. Now, Grimm had completely changed, and his battle strength was at its peak. Name: Grimm Race. Human attributes: Strength 7. 32 plus 1. Agility 7. 51 plus 1. Vitality 9. 47 plus 1. Spiritual force. Profession: Wizard Apprentice Advanced. HP. Profession experience state. Healthy profession skills: Scroll copying, spell reading, magic puppet creation. Intermediate. Skilled spellcasting personal skills. Body of Flame. Passive. Burning Hand. Solidified. Flame Arrow. Solidified. Flame Spear. Solidified. Flame Shield. Flame Reflect. Melee passive. Witchcraft equipment. Flame Lord Scepter. Storage belt. Secret Voodoo Scroll. Noble Headband. Spirit +1. Ainstone. Spirit +2. Boots of Speed. Agility +1. Talisman of Brute Force. Constitution. Strength +1. Dispel Wand. Healing Wand. Prophecy Wand. Green Fairy. Curse Resistance +5. Screaming Branch. After throwing out a large number of magical crystals, Grimm finally experienced the huge difference in strength between him and Linley. Among the gems brought back from the underground was the Star of Elun. After being cut and processed by a gem master, he obtained a +2 mental strength stone, coupled with a noble headband that gave +1 spirit. Although Grimm's current spirit was only 16 points, he could already display a terrifying combat power of 19 points. This meant that if Grimm went all out, he would be able to control 6 rock python manticores, or 2 lightning giants and 1 rock python manticores at the same time. However, creating a lightning giant required the core of a quasi-wizard storm giant, which was a forbidden item that could only be found by chance. Therefore, Cabby almost went to all the merchant guilds around the Wizard Tower, but he could not find a second one. During this time, Cabby's name had become famous in the middle and lower levels of the Wizard Tower. Almost all the wizard families and merchant guilds knew of his existence. In the Dark Crypt, almost all the high-end materials and resources were monopolized by the wizard families and merchant guilds. They bought almost all the specialties of the Dark Crypt on the market and sold them to other regions, making the most money through the price difference between regions. Although other ordinary merchant guilds and wandering merchants wanted to do the same, they did not have such strong financial strength and connections to the entire wizard continent, so they could not compete with them. Cabby only needed to sell a night ice stone and a water jade to quickly win the hearts of these small merchant guilds and wandering merchants. Perhaps he had received a warning from the power behind him, but Cabby's act of selling high-grade materials and resources without them was not stopped by them. This further solidified Cabby's mysterious and powerful image. Most of the mysterious equipment that Grimm needed were obtained from these wandering merchants. Grimm had a clear understanding of his own strength. Most of his power was now concentrated on his magic manticores. At least, before he completed the structure of his fire spells, he could only rely on the magic manticores to maintain a strong attack power. He did not need to worry about his attack power, so Grimm shifted the focus of his research on fire spells to defense. Whether it was the flame shield, body of flame, or high-temperature field, these were all defensive fire spells. As long as he did not encounter a powerful wizard, even a quasi-wizard would find it difficult to break through his layers of defense under the siege of so many magic manticores. However, there were many types of spells, and many low-grade spells were invisible and hard to defend against. Therefore, in order to prevent himself from failing miserably, Grimm frantically bought some high-quality magic wands and wands. The Dispel wand could remove some negative effects on his body, such as poisoning, slowing, freezing, and paralysis. The Heal wand could heal some obvious physical injuries. The Prophecy wand could predict the direction of danger in advance. If it was not for the fact that Dagon was not an area with abundant resources, Grimm planned to prepare a set of preventive or healing methods for all possible attacks in the Dark Crypt. Preparedness averts peril. This was Grimm's unwavering creed in life. With such equipment, Grimm was confident that he could even fight against a quasi-wizard. Of course, he could not fight against a top-level wizard like Fu. Magic manticores made from high-level crystal cores were too weak against a top-level wizard like Fu. It was difficult to use the characteristics of the elemental magic manticores to weaken him. If Grimm really wanted to fight against Fu, he would need to upgrade his magic manticores to the quasi-wizard level and have 2 lightning giants as his main fighting force. Therefore, with his current power, although Grimm could threaten Fu, he still did not have the confidence to win. As for those below Fu, Grimm was not arrogant. If it was a fair fight, no wizard apprentice would be a match for him. However, seeing that his power was steadily increasing, Grimm did not dare to step into the Dark Crypt again. It was because of the battle in the Enchanted Forest, where one quasi-wizard was killed and another was seriously injured. Blissful City had already issued a kill order for Grimm. If he dared to step into the Dark Crypt, Blissful City would kill him at all costs. This also meant that there was a high chance that there would be a fallen wizard among the people who would try to kill him. Therefore, after hearing this news from Wizard Angus, Grimm was completely speechless. He could only shut himself up and never step out of the Wizard Tower again. Although in this area, the sorcerers of the surface occupied an advantageous position. When the fallen sorcerers hardened their hearts and wanted to kill a sorcerer apprentice, there were naturally thousands of ways to do so. Therefore, after Grimm offered a few of his most precious gems to Angus, he was finally exempted from the forced labor and training camp missions. He could now hide in the Wizard Tower until the end of the forced mission. After all, this Wizard Angus was the appraiser for their compulsory trial mission. Grimm and Mary could hide and relax, but the rest of the team members who came with them were miserable. After 2 senior apprentices died and Grimm and Mary left, The remaining team members wanted to recruit some temporary teammates to help them complete the mission. Unfortunately, they could not find anyone. Left with no choice, they could only form a team and run around the 5 mission points day and night. Each mission period was 15 days long, and they needed 11 to 12 days to be able to complete all 5 mission points. Not even 2 or 3 days had passed since they went back, and the next mission came. Especially after the fall of the Quasi-Wizard, Elysium City's attacks on the surface had become more frequent. Almost every day, their team of 6 would be ambushed or plotted against. If it were not for the strength of the 3 Quasi-Wizards, they would not have been able to resist such a cycle of terrorist attacks. But after such a high-intensity battlefield and witchcraft attack, the strength of the 6 members of the team had also increased by leaps and bounds. Compared to when they had first arrived here a few months ago, their levels had not changed, but their true battle prowess had doubled. Especially Sabrina, who was the leader. She had a faint, murderous aura and fierceness like Kevin the Blackhand when they first met. Grimm and Mary had also met the team members who had returned from a mission in the Wizard Tower. The hostility between them had reached a point where there was no need to hide it. Although they had heard that Grimm had displayed astonishing battle prowess here, and had once defeated a prospective sorcerer who was about to advance to a bloodline sorcerer, they were confident that their battle prowess had greatly increased after training in the underground world. As a result, sparks almost broke out when they met. The place where they met was in front of Wizard Angus's residence. Grimm and Mary had come to ask some questions about witchcraft, while the team had just finished an underground trial and came to exchange their mission items. A few members of the team who had suffered a lot glared at them. Only the team leader, Sabrina, smiled and greeted Grimm and Mary. After the two disappeared, Sabrina still looked in the direction where they disappeared for a long time, thinking about something. "What's wrong, leader? Why do you still care about those 2 bastards? If they didn't quit halfway, our trial mission would not have become so difficult." The Thunder Quasi-Wizard, Leo, came over and whispered. From his tone, it could be heard that he was sincerely convinced by Sabrina. Sabrina's mechanical eyes, hidden under the silver mask, emitted a dark green light. She said coldly, "Haven't you noticed? One of them is a Quasi-Wizard, and the other is a senior apprentice." Caw. Chapter 116. 2 months later, as the airship slowly landed on the square, the Dark Crypt's compulsory trial mission was finally coming to an end. Just like when they first arrived, the muscular man in golden armor was still in charge of escorting them. When he saw Grimm and the others, the muscular man's face revealed an indescribable smile. "Ha ha, brats, you've been doing well in the underground, haven't you? Let me check. Not bad, not bad. There are still 7 of you left. Looks like those fellows in the underground are quite polite to you. Why is there one more quasi-sorcerer? Looks like some of you are really doing well. Ha! Was that beginner apprentice the first to die? A beginner apprentice dared to come here and mess around? You're asking for death. Ha ha! Listening to the muscular man's self-entertaining lecture, the faces of the few people present turn a little unsightly. During the trial team's last underground patrol, they had been ambushed by the fallen acolytes. Senior acolyte Bruce had died in battle, while the others had escaped with injuries. Hence, when they heard the muscular man's mockery, they all lowered their heads to hide the flames of anger in their eyes. Grimm bowed with a bitter expression. "Sir Samir, I'm the beginner acolyte you mentioned." Samir's laughter stopped abruptly. He stared at Grimm with his bell-like eyes, and vaguely saw a trace of his past from Grimm's enlarged body. "Senior acolyte. Kid, looks like you're doing the best in this group. All right. No matter what you've been like in the past, get on the airship now. I'm in a hurry to finish the mission and report back." Everyone boarded the airship in silence. Goblin Cabby, as Grimm's slave, also boarded the airship after paying 1 magical crystal as a token. When the airship rose into the air with a slight tremble, the group leaned against the side of the airship and looked at the people and buildings below them becoming smaller and smaller. They felt extremely complicated. They were like birds that had suddenly escaped from their cages, and their mood suddenly relaxed. Those who were familiar with them even gathered together and laughed happily. However, the huge gap between the teams was still there. The team of 7 was divided into 2 distinct groups. Before leaving the Dark Crypt Wizard Tower, Grimm ordered Cabby to sell off all the magic gems and materials that he could not use for the time being. He worked hard to purchase large amounts of magical beast ingredients, as well as all the magic knowledge and elemental crystal cores that he could gather. He knew very well that compared to this place, the conditions in the Swamp Tower were so shabby that it could be considered a barren land. Once he returned, there would be no more mana-set meal, no more apprentice market, and no more merchant guilds with many resources. At that time, he would have to rely on himself for everything. The large amount of resources and supplies he had bought filled his storage belt to the brim. In order to bring them back, Grimm had even bought 5 to 6 pouches in one go. However, despite this being the case, there were still quite a few materials that couldn't be stored. Because of this, Elite Cabby simply placed them in a large bag and carried them on his back, not willing to throw them away no matter where he went. The airship was flying in the sky, and it was in the middle of a well-developed human settlement, so its flying speed was extremely fast. When they came here, the Dark Crypt was the last stop, but when they returned, they became the first stop. Hence, as the airship passed by one mission point after another in different regions, more and more acolytes began to board the ship. Compared to the high spirits they had when they first arrived, it was obvious that the acolytes who had gone through hardships had lost their edges and corners, becoming much more reserved and reserved. However, when a number of people on the ship exceeded 100, it was inevitable that it would become lively. The ones who walked around the deck of the airship and called out to their friends the most were, of course, the high-ranked acolytes. Although the middle-ranked acolytes were the most numerous, most of the time they could only serve as supporting characters. However, the real stars of the circle of acolytes were still the quasi-sorcerers. After this experience, these quasi-sorcerers would definitely become the future hope of their families when they returned. Hence, they wanted to take advantage of this rare gathering to come into contact with their competitors of the same rank. A quasi-sorcerer only had eyes for another quasi-sorcerer. When the airship passed through the Dagon and Burkata regions, the number of quasi-sorcerers gathered on the airship had reached 10, including the newly advanced blood element quasi-sorcerer Mary and the demonic insect in tech. Yes, unfortunately, the demonic insect in tech had also successfully advanced to a quasi-sorcerer in this trial. Perhaps he was very satisfied with his progress, but when he boarded the airship at the Burkata mission point, he did not cover his face with a hood like he usually did. Compared to before, his face had become even uglier. The muscles on his face were dark, and a ring of strange small eyes had appeared around his purple pupils. When all the eyes blinked at the same time, they were so densely packed that it was rather terrifying. His mouth had now been replaced by the mouth of a beetle-like lotus petal. When his black lips opened and moved, one could even see the scarlet flesh cavity and green saliva within. It was obvious that the demonic insect in tech was changing his body more and more deeply. Now, he could practically be called a half-insect. Although he was not interested in completely abandoning his human body, Grimm still had to admit that this demonic insect in tech was the most ruthless and cruel acolyte he had ever seen. His great strength had also given in tech great confidence, so he did not need to care about what others thought of him. This could be seen from the way he arrogantly boarded the airship. However, when his purple compound eyes swept across the bustling crowd and landed on Mary and Grimm, the few high-ranking acolytes following behind him actually felt a trace of seriousness and anger from their fearless boss. When they followed their boss' gaze and saw the proud and isolated Mary in a red dress and red armor with a red bow on her back, all of their faces revealed expressions of shock and intoxication. However, when they sensed the deep and powerful spiritual undulations from Mary's body, they were all shocked at the same time. They hurriedly put away their lecherous looks and bowed slightly towards Mary to show their respect. Such a beautiful and cold beauty was actually a quasi-sorcerer. The acolytes could not help but sigh inwardly at the bias of the world will. Intech coldly stared at Mary for a long time before pulling up his hood to cover his face again and silently walking to the side. Throughout the entire process, his gaze did not even linger on Grim. "Looks like we'll have to fight when we get back." This Tech seems to have gained quite a lot as well. Grim did not mind the demonic insect's disdain, and instead teased with a smile. No matter how well he hides, he can't hide it as well as you. You're the most pretentious person I've ever seen. You obviously have such powerful methods, but you still pretend to be harmless, waiting for some idiot to kill himself in front of you. Are you addicted to self-abuse?" Mary retorted with dissatisfaction. She could not be completely sure now. This damned bastard pushed her to the position of a quasi-sorcerer. Was it really for her own good? Or was he just habitually pushing her to the front to hide his evil hobby of backstabbing people? At the last mission point in the Bracada region, the Mad Girl also boarded the airship. When the few of them suddenly met, not only did they not feel the slightest joy of reunion, but the atmosphere became even more solemn and strange. The Mad Girl was still at the level of a high-level acolyte, although her strength had increased by quite a bit in the trial mission. Compared to the demonic insect and Mary, she clearly lacked some opportunities. When they first arrived, the relationship between the Mad Girl and the demonic insect, in Tech, could be considered harmonious in order to resist the outsider, Mary, who had suddenly risen to power. But now that the demonic insect had also become a quasi-sorcerer, the Mad Girl suddenly became estranged from him. She walked to the side to find a place to rest, and did not take the posture of congratulating him. This made Grim curious, and he began to think about the real relationship between them. Soon, when the airship turned into the Alathia region, the number of acolytes on board had already reached more than 260. As for those who did not board the airship, they had probably already died in the mission. When they first arrived, there were 11 quasi-sorcerers, but when they returned, the number of quasi-sorcerers had already reached 14. This also meant that during the trial mission, there were 3 lucky high-level acolytes who had leapt to become the favored ones of the heavens. Everyone's gazes fell on them, filled with unexplainable envy and deeply hidden hatred. After more than 10 days of long-distance flight, they entered the central region of the scattered towers. These acolytes left the airship one after another, and Grim and the others successfully arrived at the Swamp Tower. Since this batch of acolytes was heading towards the Dagon region, which was at the very edge of the scattered towers, they were considered the last batch of acolytes to return. Thus, the acolytes standing in front of the gate to welcome them represented almost all of the current official acolytes of the Swamp Tower. Still on the airship, Grim's eyes scanned the area, and the AI chip calculated the number of people below, 37. If the 9 people on the airship were included, there were only 46 people in total. Compared to the previous 62 people, the number had decreased by a third. This rate of attrition was probably the highest among all the wizard towers. The reason for this was obviously related to the inaction of the Wizard Anderson of the Swamp Tower. In the past years, Grim and the others had been trapped in this magic swamp, and resources were scarce. Usually, even when conducting a spell experiment, they would have to painstakingly gather materials and exchange them for resources. The most direct consequence of this was that the acolytes of the Swamp Tower were unbelievably weak compared to other wizard towers, and they were so poor that it left people speechless. With this kind of strength, participating in an acolyte trial with a certain degree of danger, almost any accident would be a disaster of life and death for them. Even for those acolytes who had successfully passed the trial, most of them had completed the mission with the worst results, so they did not improve much. On the contrary, the faces of the 10 acolytes, led by Alan, were brimming with smiles. Facing those acolytes who had risked their lives but gained little, they increasingly felt that their choice at that time was far-sighted and wise. Chapter 117. Mary became a prospective wizard. Compared to Endic's sudden advancement, the crowd was surprised, but not too surprised. After all, he was one of the 3 most powerful people in the Swamp Tower. However, Mary's advancement surprised the crowd and made them feel even more incredulous. Therefore, under the cover of Mary's huge aura of a prospective wizard, Grimm's advancement to a senior acolyte was only widely discussed among the junior acolytes. The senior acolytes, who had the right to speak among the acolytes, had their eyes firmly locked on the two newly born prospective wizards. In just one night, the Swamp Tower was going to change. As the new head acolyte, Alan had prepared a long and emotional welcome speech. However, when he stood in front of the evil Indic and the demonic Mary, he was suppressed by the cold and terrifying aura of the two. His body trembled slightly, and he could not even say a word that suited the situation. "We're tired. We need to rest. You can all go now." Mary was still as cold and arrogant as ever. Only when she faced her prey would she reveal a bewitching smile that came from the bottom of her heart. To be honest, even if the cats and dogs in front of her stretched out their necks and sent them to her mouth, she would not even bother to bite them. Alan's strength was not enough to deal with such a powerful underling. Thus, he tactfully dodged to the side and gave way to the gate. Following behind Grimm, the goblin Cappy had 6 or 7 bulging pouches on his waist and a huge cloth bag on his back. He followed Grimm into the Swamp Tower. With Wizard Anderson's personality, it was obvious that he would not waste time on welcoming back acolytes. Of course, if he had known that 2 acolytes had successfully advanced to a prospective wizard, he might have changed his mind and come forward to rope them in. After all, the group of prospective wizards was very special. If one of them was lucky enough to advance, they would instantly become someone who could be mentioned in the same breath as him. If the Cerubo family knew that he had wasted a prospective wizard, then the senior wizards in the family would definitely politely invite him to have a chat. Therefore, in this isolated private resource point, even high-ranked acolytes were targets that he could do whatever he wanted. However, to a quasi-sorcerer, any harm to a quasi-sorcerer was equivalent to killing the future of a sorcerer family. On the contrary, as long as Anderson reported the matter of the 2 quasi-wizards to the Cerubo family, the family would definitely reward him greatly for his grooming. The amount of resources and materials he received from the family every year would also increase greatly. Of course, if Intich and Mary wanted to obtain more resources from the Cerubo family, they would have to sign a contract with the Cerubo family. They would have to become magi and serve the family for years in exchange for a corresponding share of resources. The longer the years of service, the higher the share of resources. If they were willing to join the family, they could receive the full support of the family. Therefore, on the night when Grimm and the others returned to the Swamp Tower, Intich and Mary were summoned by Wizard Anderson to the 5th floor. There, they met the other official wizard from the Cerubo family, Kogan. Through Wizard Kogan's introduction, the two of them had a general understanding of the Cerubo family situation. The Cerubo family was founded by the great rank 4 elemental wizard Cerubo 1,300 years ago. At that time, Cerubo was the vice president of the Outland Tower Forest Wizard Association, and he had an illustrious reputation in the central continent. 500 years ago, the founder of the family became a rank 5 magus of laws in one fell swoop. From then on, he stepped into the sea of stars and never returned. This was actually the most common situation in most sorcerer families on the Magus continent. Every sorcerer family was founded around a powerful magus. If this magus successfully stepped into rank 5, it was inevitable that he would step into the endless sea of stars and conquer the weaker planes in the depths of the sea of stars. If a magus could not smoothly advance to rank 5, there would be a time when his or her life would come to an end. A sorcerer family that had lost the deterrence of a powerful magus would inevitably be coveted and annexed by other sorcerer families. Families with rank 5 magi fighting in the outer world were relatively stable. After all, rank 5 magi were not allowed to personally return to the sorcerer world. However, their harvest in the outer world could be continuously transferred back to the family. With these high-quality resources from other planes, the family would be able to maintain its strength and nurture a steady stream of new blood to fill the vacuum left by the departure of the family's powerhouses. The reason why these rank 5 powerhouses were willing to transfer their hard-earned resources back to the family was so that the family could nurture more magi suitable for planar wars. When they carried out large-scale expeditions in other planes, the Magi within the family would be the main force in the war. Hence, when Intich and Mary signed a family contract with the Solubo family, they would inevitably participate in the planar wars of the Solubo family after becoming Magi. According to Wizard Kogan, the Solubo family currently did not have any rank 4 Magi. They only had 1 rank 3 Magus, 1 rank 2 Magus, and 7 rank 1 official Magi. This kind of strength could only be considered average in the area ruled by the scattered forest of towers. The Solubo family's base was in Ferdinand City, which was 2,600 miles away from here. This was only one of the family's 4 large resource points, and it was guarded by Wizard Anderson all year round. After a simple description of the family situation, Wizard Kogan began to ask the two their choices. Would they like to exchange their years of service for resources, or would they like to join the family and receive full support? Unexpectedly, Intich chose to join the family, while Mary chose to serve for 10 years. Actually, if there was a shorter period of service, Mary would rather choose it. This was also a decision she had discussed with Grimm beforehand. Unfortunately, the lowest period of service Kogan gave her was 10 years. Soon, the two of them left their mark on the contract that Wizard Kogan had given them. From now on, their statuses were no longer the same as the apprentices they had been before. Naturally, the treatment they would receive would be different as well. After Intich made his choice, Kogan immediately gave him a family badge and told him to move to the 4th floor as soon as possible. That was an area that normal acolytes could not enter. Although Mary was also allowed to live on the 4th floor, she had to pay 2 magic crystals per day. As for the reason, it was because the residents on the 4th floor could already artificially adjust the concentration of certain elemental particles, which was greatly beneficial to the meditation effects and subtle body modifications of the residents. As an employer, Mary obviously could not enjoy the benefits of being a member of the family. After Wizard Kogan had left, Mary and Wizard Anderson had another deep conversation. Both of them had bargained for a fair deal, and both of them were satisfied with the price. What Mary paid was a big bucket of fresh blood, and in exchange, Grimm also had the right to live on the 4th floor. Mary also promised that if she really became a wizard, she would not look for Anderson for revenge. She would also provide a wizard-ranked blood sample for Anderson to complete his research. To be honest, Anderson's experiment on Mary was actually a bloodline research that could not be made public. It could only be said that Mary's luck was not bad. She had finally endured that painful bloodline modification and became a strange vampire. The reason why she was called a strange vampire was because the vampire bloodline that Wizard Anderson obtained was not pure, and its origin was also suspicious. Therefore, under Grimm's repeated reminders, Mary voluntarily expressed that she was willing to let go of her past hatred, but she had to get some information and samples of her original bloodline. Therefore, everyone was happy. Both of them had obtained what they wanted the most. Mary staggered back to Grimm's room, threw the things in her hand to him, and fell asleep on the bed. She had no choice. After losing so much blood, even with her body, she would need to sleep for a long time to recover. After settling Mary down, Grimm calmly sat in front of the wooden table and carefully examined a small reagent bottle in front of him. It was a glass test tube as thick as a finger. It was not long, and when he carefully examined it, he could only see a drop of almost dried blood at the bottom of the test tube. That Wizard Anderson was actually a dabbler in bloodline research. Once, when he was in the territory of the Solubo family, he encountered a vampire that had been hiding very deeply in human society. 3 wizards from the Solubo family worked together, but they still could not defeat this powerful vampire. In the end, the rank 2 wizard from the Solubo family had to personally come out and chase this guy out of the family's territory. When he was searching the mysterious castle that this guy was living in, Wizard Anderson accidentally found a tube of highly purified vampire blood. Obviously, that vampire that had escaped was also doing some kind of bloodline research. Therefore, Wizard Anderson secretly hid this spoil of war and hid in this desolate swamp tower. He quietly carried out the vampire mutation experiment related to this. Unfortunately, Most of the experiments had ended in failure. All the creatures that were injected with vampire blood all died without exception. The genes of a vampire's blood could be considered extremely tyrannical among the bloodline creatures. Any other bloodline that fused with it would only become its nourishment. It was impossible for them to be compatible. At first, Anderson thought that the body of the creature sample he had chosen was too weak and could not withstand the violent blood transformation. Therefore, he used his power and began to carry out blood experiments on the Wizard Tower's apprentices. 3 intermediate apprentices were injected with vampire origin blood, but Mary was the only one who survived. Therefore, Mary became the key to his follow-up research. For vampires, there was no point in keeping them in captivity. After all, vampires were purifying their bloodline by continuously sucking the blood of the strong. That was why Anderson let Mary go, hoping that she could complete the purification of her bloodline through independent evolution. Needless to say, his opinion was correct. At least, Mary's progress had far exceeded his expectations. Presumably, through experiments and analysis of the old and new vampire blood, he should be able to further his research on vampire mutation. Chapter 118. The next day, in a rare occasion, Wizard Anderson gathered all the acolytes in the tower and announced in Titch, Mary, and Grimm's new identities. From now on, the 3 of them were no longer restricted by the acolyte system. They could do whatever they wanted with their lives, and they were now second only to Wizard Anderson. They had the highest authority in the Wizard Tower. In the crowd, the new head acolyte, Alan, had an extremely ugly expression on his face, but there was nothing he could do. Quasi-wizard. This was a group of monsters between acolytes and official magi. It was difficult to accurately predict who among them would successfully advance to become a magus. Thus, for low-ranked acolytes, offending any one of them could turn into a disaster in the future. But Alan had already deeply angered one of them. Thus, the moment the meeting ended, Alan brought all the resources he could gather to visit in Titch. Since in Titch, Mary and Grimm had all moved their residences to the 4th floor of the Wizard Tower. Even Alan, the head acolyte, had to first request a visit if he wanted to see in Titch. Then, he would have to humbly stand at the entrance to the 4th floor and wait for permission. And that was not the worst part. The most infuriating thing was that damned Grimm had unceremoniously brought his contracted creature, a goblin, to the 4th floor and made her resident. This made Alan even more resentful. A goblin, a lowly, filthy, cowardly goblin, was actually riding on his head? Thinking of this, Alan's heart felt as if it was stuffed with straw. It was so stuffy. Nobody knew what Alan and the evil bug in Titch had discussed in secret. However, when Alan came out in Titch's room, he immediately became arrogant and once again regained his previous arrogance. While Alan was changing, a small meeting was going on in the Mad Girl's room. There were only 2 people in the meeting, the Mad Girl and Eagle-Eye Crusoe. Once upon a time, in order to maintain unity and ensure that the interests of their subordinates were not harmed, the 3 strongest people of the Swamp Tower would often gather together to discuss matters. But today, with the evil bug in Titch becoming a quasi-wizard, the originally harmonious circle of the 3 strongest people had become a thing of the past. Everything had fundamentally changed. How is it? Your circle is stable, right? The madwoman's eyes were currently filled with a cold glint. She was far from being as impetuous and reckless as she was in the past, displaying the calmness and wisdom that a high-ranked apprentice should have. Benson and Carl called for a meeting, but the few fence-sitters did not come, using an important witchcraft experiment as an excuse. Looks like they have decided to change sides. Eagle-Eye Crusoe smiled helplessly and said, "The evil worm's stalwart Chris is currently recruiting. Those guys might have already contacted him secretly." Oomph. With that, Crusoe raised his head and glanced at the Mad Girl, asking, "What about you? How's the situation over there?" Oomph. Same to you. Donna can no longer command her subordinates. She even complained to me just now. The 2 of them were speechless, feeling a little melancholy in their hearts. At the beginning of the compulsory mission, They had underestimated the trial mission and did not push themselves too hard. The madwoman chose a red mission that wasn't too dangerous, while Krusar chose an orange mission that was one level lower. Now that they were faced with two rising quasi-sorcerers, even though these veteran high-ranked apprentices were unwilling, they felt even more helpless and powerless. After a moment of silence, Krusar finally opened his mouth. Currently, it seems like the relationship between Intich and Mary is very bad, to the point where they are at loggerheads. Do you think we should choose a side between them? You want to rely on one of them? The mad woman's expression darkened. As a veteran high-ranked apprentice, she could not imagine the humiliating and terrifying life she would have to put down her pride and become someone else's follower. I'm afraid that in a few days, we won't be able to choose for ourselves. Krusar was rather calm and realistic. Mary is too arrogant. Other than her gigolo, she doesn't care about anyone else's feelings or face. She won't take care of our inherent benefits either. So you want to get in touch with Intich? Yes. Even though the evil worm's thinking is rather extreme, he has been in contact with us for a long time. As long as we give up some benefits, he should be able to accept us. After all, if he wants to deal with Mary, he still needs our help. No matter how many chickens and dogs he recruited, they would be useless against a quasi-shaman. The only ones who can help him are the two of us. The mad woman snorted, forcefully suppressing her anger, and nodded in agreement with Hawkeye's opinion. However, before she could express her opinion, the evil worm in Tich's low and hoarse voice suddenly sounded in the secret room where only the two of them were present. I didn't expect you to still be able to size up the situation, Hawkeye. Not bad. I currently need the two of you to help me. The two who were in the middle of a secret conversation were shocked. The mad woman even opened a pair of bell-like leopard eyes and scanned her residence with a burning gaze. Just as the two of them watched uneasily, a strange rustling sound came from behind Krusar's dark back. Immediately after, a strange scorpion with a unique appearance burrowed out from within, waving its giant pincers at the two of them. On the black carapace of the scorpion's back, a pale human face protruded out. It was Intich's ugly, mutated face. Long time no see, you two. Why didn't you tell me about the gathering? The madwoman, Hawkeye, remained silent and did not answer Intich's question. However, the flickering in their eyes revealed the nervousness in their hearts. They did not expect that they would be unable to see through the other party's witchcraft with just a minor rank difference. Don't be nervous, you two. Just as Hawkeye said, I am in urgent need of your help. If the two of you are willing to condescend and join my evil worm alliance, I, Intich, will gladly welcome you. The corner of the madwoman's mouth twitched violently a few times. She was no fool. Since this so-called alliance was named after Intich, everything naturally revolved around Intich. To put it nicely, the two of them were allies, but to put it bluntly, they were just high-level thugs. Although she was unwilling, the madwoman still wanted to hear the other party's true intentions. What do you need us to do for you? Help me monitor the two's every move. If necessary, help me deal with them together. Don't worry, I won't let the two of you fight Mary. If a conflict really breaks out, I only need the two of you to help me deal with Grim. I'll deal with Mary myself. After hearing Intich's words, the two of them could not hide their astonishment. Clitha could not help but blurt out, You only want the two of us to help you deal with Grim? He has just become a high-level acolyte. I should be able to deal with a newbie like him by myself, right? Kakik, the human face on the back of the scorpion, emitted Intich's signature sinister laughter. Hawkeye, don't think too highly of yourself. I'm afraid the two of you haven't noticed, but Grim is obviously the leader of the Mary and Grim team. In other words, he's the core of the team. What? Impossible. The madwoman and Hawkeye's reaction was the same as when they heard that the evil worm had become a quasi-wizard. They were extremely shocked. The evil worm Intich, who had become a quasi-wizard, actually treated the former junior acolyte with such caution. This was too unexpected. Could it be that there was really something strange about Grim? Don't forget that this Mary is just a second-class vampire that mutated halfway. It's a fool's dream to think that she can advance quickly with such a terrible bloodline talent. The only one who could bring about such a strange change in her is that strange boy whose strength has skyrocketed. In this team, Grim is the only one I can't see through. Clutho was silent for a moment and could not help but ask, Mary is now a quasi-wizard. Will the great Magi agree to you going against her in public? As soon as he finished speaking, Hawkeye heard in Titch's extremely arrogant and sinister laughter. Kakik, I signed a family contract, and she only signed a contract of employment. Who do you think the Magi and the family will help if something happens? Also, if the higher-ups don't get involved, do you think I'll be so eager to go against a quasi-wizard the same rank as me? You're saying that the one who wants to go against Mary is Ender. Clutho lost his voice. Shut up, Hawkeye. If you don't want to die without knowing the reason, then keep your damn words to yourself. There are some things that you can just do. There's no need to be so clear about it. It won't do you any good. The demonic insect in Titch hurriedly interrupted Clutha's words. His ugly and hideous face finally revealed a threatening expression. Hawkeye Clutha swallowed his saliva with difficulty and exchanged glances with Madgirl. Finally, he nodded silently. Kakik, I knew you'd make the wisest choice. All right, if necessary, I'll contact you. Hawkeye, you'll be in charge of keeping an eye on those two. Madgirl, you'll be in charge of training the intermediate apprentices. When we find the right opportunity, we'll teach them a good lesson. As soon as he finished speaking, the sinister and arrogant insect hisses echoed in the residence. The black scorpion suddenly turned into a puddle of poisonous liquid, slowly merging into the floor and disappearing. Only Madgirl and Hawkeye were left in the room, speechless. In a secret room on the 4th floor of the Swamp Tower, the scorpion that had disappeared suddenly burrowed out of the floor and crawled onto a cold figure covered in a black cloak. The cold figure suddenly reached out a strange hand that was half flesh and half carapace, grabbed the scorpion, and stuffed it into his mouth. When the scorpion was chewed by his sawtooth-like teeth and turned into a puddle of blood and carapace fragments, only then did the demonic insect in Titch raise his head and reveal his face. It could be seen that in just a few days, the degree of his insect transformation had deepened. Now, rather than a human acolyte, he was more like an insect person with the identity of a human. Chapter 119. Outside the pitch-black tower, a red-eyed raven silently glided across the night sky. Suddenly, in a brightly lit room on the 4th floor of the Swamp Tower that stood quietly, a blood-red fluorescent light shone and shot out of the window, blasting the red-eyed crow into a mist of blood. This is the 4th one. What is that eagle-eye trying to do? Mary gently put away the blood bow in her hand and cursed. Do you want me to talk to him now? Looks like they've joined forces again. Grim replied indifferently as he busied himself. Mary tilted her head and thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement with Grim's point of view. Eagle-Eye, who was once one of the 3 strongest, was at most a high-ranked acolyte. If Mary was really angered, she could tear down his nest in minutes. Since the other party dared to send these lackeys to spy on them again and again, there must be someone supporting them from behind. In this swamp tower, the only one who could do this was that demonic worm Endic. Most of the rooms on the 4th floor were for official magi. Hence, apart from the luxurious and comfortable bedrooms, there was also a specialized study room and a small laboratory. At this moment, Grim was meticulously lying on the small alchemy table, observing the changes in the drop of first blood through a special spell formation. In the past few days, he had tried almost every method to activate the gene activity of this drop of first blood. In the end, he discovered that only blood filled with energy could save this drop of first blood. Thus, Grim cut his wrist and poured his blood filled with fire elemental energy into a test tube. Soon, he obtained a tube of boiling blood that had mutated slightly. No, to be honest, this did not look like a tube of blood, but more like a blood monster trapped in a test tube. The blood Grim injected was quickly devoured by the first blood, then contaminated and mutated into a vampire's blood that was identical to his own. Although the fire energy in Grim's blood killed a large number of vampire blood factors, Under the continuous attack of the blood factors, the fire energy was neutralized, and all of Grimm's blood was infected and mutated. Then, the tube of blood turned into a blood monster that seemed to have its own consciousness. It kept pulling out needle-like tentacles from the sticky blood and madly stabbed the solid wall of the vulcanized test tube. If it weren't for the fact that the walls of the vulcanized tubes were as strong as magic alloys, they would have escaped. Grimm was amazed as he observed their actions. Too magical, simply too magical. In this strange world of high magic, even a drop of a high-ranked vampire's primordial blood could display such terrifying destructive power. It was conceivable that when a vampire injected this blood factor into the body of its prey, the life and death of the enemy would be in its hands. Could it be that the secret of the high-ranking vampires being able to produce blood thralls on a large scale was hidden here? After the first drop of the first blood had assimilated so much blood, it had hidden itself deep within the mass of blood. If Grimm had not relied on the chips helped to attach a spiritual mark to the blood, it would have been difficult for him to find the true location of the first blood in the mass of blood that was constantly changing its surface structure. The energy required for the mass of blood to move came from the nutrients produced by the decomposition of the blood factors. Hence, the more intense its activity, the more frenzied its movements became, and the smaller its body became. It was like a ball of raging flame, and its fuel was actually its own body. When it finally realized that it could not escape, the mass of blood finally calmed down and entered a dormant state. At this time, it had shrunk from the size of an egg to the size of a thumb. According to the chip's estimation, this thumb-sized mass of blood could sustain its life for half a year. It would only enter a dormant state when it was stimulated by the outside world. Were the vampires of the other world so terrifying? Or was there something special about the vampire that Anderson and the rest were trying to kill? It was no wonder that after Mary became a vampire, her intelligence was slightly impaired, and her temperament became irritable and irritable. Anyone whose body was filled with this kind of blood that could spontaneously combust at any time would find it hard to remain calm and meticulous. According to the characteristics of this drop of first blood, Grimm had reason to suspect that when the owner of the blood was close enough, it was possible to control this drop of blood again, and then control the owner's consciousness and life. For this reason, Grimm had searched through all the records and experimental descriptions related to vampires, piecing together the direction and path of evolution of the vampire race bit by bit. He was trying to find a way for Mary to break through the shackles of her blood. Mary was, after all, a mutated vampire. To put it bluntly, she was just a slightly more advanced blood thrall. If that high-ranked vampire appeared in front of Mary, she might not even have the chance to control her own fate. Hence, Grimm's goal in researching the first blood was to sever the spiritual connection between the mutated blood and its source bloodline, thus allowing her to become the true owner of his body. At the entrance of the magic swamp, it was still the same desolate hillside. With an ear-piercing whistle, a witch wearing a gray sorcerer's robe and a gray pointed hat descended from the sky on her flying broomstick and stepped into the wilderness. When she stepped down from the broomstick with difficulty, a lively and adorable little girl who looked like a doll jumped out from behind her. She was not tall, had a baby face, and was holding a golden birdcage in her hand. It was Alice, the one who had suffered a great loss in the magic swamp. Great-grandmother, this is the place. Although Alice looked sweet when she saw the familiar scene in front of her, her azure blue eyes shot out rays of hatred. Those bastards who bully me live in there. The witch that Alice called great-grandmother had a face that was old beyond recognition. Below the crooked, dirty, pointy hat was the ugly, old face of a woman. Her face was full of wrinkles that looked like the bark of a tree. She had a hooked nose that looked like an eagle's beak, turbid gray eyes, and yellowish, broken teeth. Her body was bent, and her hand was leaning on the flying broomstick. She couldn't help but gasp for breath for a long time when she moved slightly. But it was such a weak, old witch who could fall to the ground and die at any time, who had a terrifying and powerful mental fluctuation. When she held the broomstick and gasped for breath for a while, she took out a dirty black pottery cake from her bosom and ordered coldly, "Go, Alice, crush this into powder and scatter it into the swamp." Although the old witch's voice was old, her words had a majesty that no one dared to disobey. Even Alice, a cunning and black-bellied woman, did not dare to disobey her will. She obediently walked to the magic swamp with the pottery cake, crushed it into powder, and scattered it into the thick mist shrouding the swamp little by little. While doing this, Alice even laid a thin layer of space barrier on her hand, so that her skin would not come into contact with the inconspicuous pottery cake at all. It was an item taken out from the bosom of the witch Ender. If it was said that there was no terrifying poison on it, then the name of the toxic which would not be spread so loudly. As expected, not long after the pottery pancakes were scattered, a new mist rose from the damp swamp and slowly blended into the swamp mist. As the new mist spread over a large area of the magic swamp, all the magical creatures living in this area suffered a disaster. A red-eyed crow landed on the ghost tree at the edge of the magic swamp. It tilted its head and looked at the two outsiders who suddenly appeared. Its fluffy black feathers suddenly exploded without a sound, and the scattered flesh and bone fragments turned into a new blood mist and merged into the air. Along the direction where the water mist spread, all the individuals with magical elements, whether it was plants or animals, exploded the moment they came into contact with the water mist. On the other hand, the ordinary plants that were close to them were not affected at all. Therefore, as the invisible water mist spread, the red-eyed crow, killing tree, vampiric rattan, green-spotted snake, hag, baby bogey, and even the parasitic magical insects suddenly exploded while they were moving freely in their habitats. When a large number of magical creatures died, the remaining individuals were those with a keen sense of danger. They no longer cared about the monster territory of the magic swamp, and one by one, they used their fastest speed to escape in the direction of the water mist. In the beginning, such a disturbance was only limited to the periphery of the magic swamp. When the water mist slowly invaded the inner periphery of the magic swamp, a magical creature finally went berserk. At this time, the patrolling sorcerer apprentices finally realized that something was wrong. Under the layers of notification, the entire swamp tower began to light up. Compared to the formal sorcerer tower in the dark crypt, the tower in the magic swamp was a lot simpler and weaker. Although most of the facilities inside could be considered complete, the monitoring of the entire swamp area was a lot weaker. Although the Salubo family had been prosperous in history, the rank 4 wizard had left for a long time, and a new rank 4 wizard had not been born for a long time. Therefore, the family's prestige and power had greatly declined. For a small resource point like this, the Salubo family did not have the financial resources to build a formal sorcerer tower to protect it, so they could only replace it with a weaker tower. Therefore, when a powerful enemy invaded, their reaction was clumsy and slow. When a magic swamp fell into chaos, Wizard Anderson, who controlled the swamp tower, finally walked out of the wizard lab and quickly locked on to the enemy's location. Chapter 120. It's really you, Ender. I don't have a grudge against you, do I? Why did you come here to make trouble? Stepping out of the whirlwind, Anderson immediately saw the old witch with a peculiar appearance. He could not help but roar angrily. Don't you forget, this is the territory of the Scattered Tower Forest. You northern witches have no right to be arrogant here. The old witch held a broom in her hand and laughed coldly like a night owl. She looked at Anderson, who was pretending to be fierce but was actually weak, and said disdainfully, "The Scattered Towers? Would they openly expel us, northern witches, for a small resource point like yours? Then you're not here to be a guest today, are you?" Anderson was still roaring, but his voice was obviously much softer, facing a combat witch from the far north. Although he had the geographical advantage, if they really fought, he was afraid that he would lose. Although these northern witches were all delicate and weak, they were able to open up territory in the bitter and cold land of the far north, and they all had a tenacious will and terrifying means that the wizards could not compare to. Not to mention the others. Ender in front of him had only been stationed in the scattered towers from the Northern Witches' territory for less than 7 years, and she had already made a name for herself as the Poison Witch. According to legend, there was once a wandering wizard who led a group of recruited bandits to rob the trade caravan that the Northern Witches had sent to the Central Continent, and killed the apprentice, which was accompanying the caravan. When Ender heard the news, she immediately attacked, and it only took her half a day to find the group of bandits. She did not rush into the other party's team to kill them, but directly sprinkled poison around the other party's campsite. Therefore, in one night, all the bandits, including the wandering wizard, died under the terrible poison. In just this one battle, this fierce old witch from the far north had poisoned nearly 300 people to death, and the poison witch title was unparalleled. As a northern witch, she started a massacre in the Scattered Towers territory, which immediately caused a strong backlash from some of the wizard families in the Central Continent. However, in this matter, the old witch was, after all, under the banner of avenging her disciple. So even if the local wizard families were dissatisfied, they could only acquiesce to her actions. Hence, whenever this venomous woman was mentioned, all the magi of the Central Continent could not help but feel troubled. After all, the central part of the continent was under the control of the scattered forest of towers. There was no large-scale invasion of demonic creatures, and the natural environment was much better than the extreme north. Therefore, the witches here had done too much witchcraft research, and their combat abilities and means had deteriorated. They were far less ferocious than the northern witches. If it wasn't for the Scattered Tower Forest's vast territory and abundant resources, the number of sorcerers here would not be able to compete with the 3 great sorcerer factions. After all, this was the private resource point of the Cerubo family. If it was any other magus of the same rank who came here to cause trouble, Anderson would have attacked without saying anything. But in the face of this infamous poisonous witch, even he, who had always been unsociable, did not dare to easily make a move. In the face of Anderson's questioning, the old poisonous woman sneered coldly. She turned around and called out, "Alice, come out and let Lord Anderson take a look at you, so that he won't continue muttering nonsense." When Anderson saw the little girl who jumped out from behind the venomous woman, his gloomy face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. "Ender, who is this little girl to you? I remember that she is under Deborah's tutelage." "You have a good memory. She is indeed learning under Deborah, but she is also my direct descendant. She is the most talented and potential apprentice, which of the Moya family. Yet, I suffered a shameful sneak attack and humiliation from you. I will take revenge for this hatred today." Damn! At this moment, Anderson did not know how many times he had cursed in his heart. Only the heavens knew that he had offended the descendant of the poisonous, which by casually teaching a high-level apprentice who had trespassed into the magic swamp a lesson. Could it be that his actions had angered the world's will, causing it to send down such a punishment to embarrass him? While secretly cursing his bad luck, Anderson snarled with a cold face. "This girl was indeed taught a lesson by me. What? You want to help her get back at her? Ender, don't forget, you are only a representative of the Northern Witches. Your attack on me will incite a war between the Magi families." "A war between families? Humph. Would your Cerubo family declare war on the Moya family over such a small matter? But don't worry, I am not here today to teach you a lesson, but to help Alice get back at her." Hearing the venomous woman's words, the doll-like Alice's eyes turned slightly red, and she threw herself into her arms, acting like a spoiled child. She even turned around and glared at Anderson. "Then what do you want? I am punishing a little girl who was rude to me, and you want me to pay the price?" Anderson's tone became even lower. I will accept your actions of teaching Alice a lesson. But the fact that your tower's acolytes attacked my Alice, we will settle the score. I will not bully the weak. Hand over those guys who hurt Alice, and let them fight again. If your people win, I will turn around and leave. But if your people lose, you have to accept your fate." Anderson's gloomy face twitched a few times. He waved his hand and loudly chanted a spell that was hard to understand. Following the flash of a dense witchcraft halo on the top of the hill, 3 figures of different shapes suddenly appeared in the air. Wizard Anderson had the highest authority in the Swamp Tower, so he didn't need to communicate with Grimm and the others. He just used his authority to forcefully teleport in Tick, Mary, and Grimm over. The 3 of them obviously didn't know what was going on, and they were all busy with their own things in their residences. Suddenly, a witchcraft halo flashed under their feet, and in a blink of an eye, they appeared in the wilderness. The 3 of them were confused at first, then shocked. When they saw Wizard Anderson, they quickly bowed and quietly waited for his orders. It's them. They're all big bad guys, and they took turns to hurt me, especially that vile vampire. He even sucked a lot of my blood. Just as Alice jumped out angrily and cursed, the poison woman who brought her here frowned deeply. 2 quasi-wizards and 1 advanced acolyte. Why is this rank so different from what Alice had described? Alice, are you sure it's them? Why is it so different from what you said? Poison Woman's face turned cold. It's them, but they were still advanced acolytes at that time. And this... Alice pointed at Grimm, her cute face flashing with a malicious light. This guy was only a beginner acolyte at that time. Did he advance? Poison Woman Ender was a little worried about facing 2 quasi-wizards. With her strength and the power of the Moya family behind her, killing 2 advanced acolytes was not a big deal. But if it involved a quasi-wizard, things would be a little tricky. To any wizard family, a quasi-wizard was their reserve force for the future, and they could not give up on any of them. According to Ender's understanding, the number of quasi-wizards in the Cerubo family was less than 2 digits. If she killed 2 of them in one go, even if the Cerubo family was weak, they would still be forced to declare war on the Moya family behind her. Alice, you can't touch those 2 quasi-wizards. Don't you hate that kid? Go and challenge that advanced kid. Kill him first, and I'll think of another way to deal with the other 2. Without saying anything, Poison Woman Ender had already sent his thoughts into Alice's mind through telepathy. Alice, who was in the middle of cursing, was slightly stunned. She then pointed at Grimm and issued a challenge. Logically speaking, this kind of meaningless challenge was not allowed. Grimm was an acolyte of the Swamp Tower, and Wizard Anderson had the obligation to protect him under his wing. But today was obviously an exception. When Alice issued a challenge, Wizard Anderson did not say a word, and it was obvious that he had tacitly agreed to it. Grimm sneered a few times in his heart. Although he had only been here for a short time, the moment he saw Alice, he could almost guess what was going to happen today. Therefore, in the face of Alice's challenge, Grimm took a step forward. Last time I beat you up, and now you're here for revenge. So this time I'm going to beat you up. When are you going to take revenge next time? Although Alice was black-bellied and ruthless, she still attached great importance to her honor. Hearing Grimm's ridicule, she immediately jumped up and down in anger. She screamed angrily, "You want to beat me? If it weren't for them taking turns to attack you last time, and if those vampire ghosts didn't help you, do you think you would still be alive now? Then what if I really beat you?" Grimm was waiting for her to say this, so he immediately retorted, "If I really beat you, my life will be yours, and I'll be your female slave for the rest of my life. But if you're defeated by me, your life will be mine." Furious, Alice roared out these words without hesitation. Poison Woman Ender, who was standing behind Alice, frowned. For some reason, an ominous thought emerged in his mind. This young man who was about to fight Alice was too calm and collected. Could it be that he had some hidden tricks up his sleeves? Ender's powerful power of the will secretly spread out and slowly extended it to Grimm's body, carefully examining him. High-level strength, ordinary fire elemental talent, and excellent magic equipment, but with this kind of strength, he was still far from being able to fight Alice. Ever since he stepped onto the path of a wizard, Ender had never seen a talent that was more powerful than Alice's talent in space. Even if those elemental apprentices had mastered powerful spells, it would be useless if they couldn't hit Alice, who could control the battlefield space. As for the body training apprentices and arcane apprentices, they were as weak as scarecrows in front of Alice. Only those bloodline apprentices with outstanding talent could pose a slight threat to Alice. However, After the last defeat, Alice suffered a lot of pain, and her short-distance teleportation spell improved by leaps and bounds. Ender could not imagine how those apprentices could resist Alice's unstoppable space slash when faced with an Alice who could come and go freely and choose her battlefield at will. What could they rely on to capture Alice, who was constantly teleporting here and there? After examining the strength of the young man in front of him, Poison Woman Ender sneered, "Say no more, kid. Go in and fight with Alice." After saying this, he took the golden birdcage from Alice's hand and waved it in front of the two. Grimm stopped the thought of summoning the Earth Core and turned his attention to the battle in the distance. Summoning the lightning giant cost him 7 MP, and summoning the 2 water golems cost him 6 MP. As for the flame shield and the fire djinn, they were abilities that came with the Flame Lord's scepter, so he didn't need to spend any extra MP. In this way, Grimm, who had 19 points of MP, had 6 points of MP left to deal with emergencies. He could decide who would be the next demon puppet to fight based on the subsequent developments of the battle. The lightning giant was the main attacker, the fire djinn was the support, and the 2 watermen were half attacking and half defending. The waterman was a water puppet that Grimm had just created using the water crystal core. In appearance, they resembled a large group of water people walking upright. They did not have feet, and their lower bodies were thick water pillars. Water splashed out from the bottom of the water pillars. The upper body of the water men vaguely resembled a human. They had a body, a head, and 2 hands. However, they were very rough. There were no facial features on the head, and the hands were just 2 thick water pillars. Although the water men looked inconspicuous, their strange abilities were quite eye-catching. As soon as the 2 watermen appeared, they started waving their hands around Grimm. Every time they waved their hands, a small waterman would be pulled out from their bodies. In the blink of an eye, the waterman would become the same as Grimm. Even their equipment and spells were the same. The 2 watermen worked together and created 12 Grimm in almost an instant. After the 13 Grimms changed positions in a dazzling manner, Grimm, who was mixed in the crowd, smiled widely. There were so many of them. To be honest, even Grimm couldn't help but feel a little nervous when there were so many of them. That wasn't the end of it. As the 2 water golems waved their hands, a large amount of mist rose and covered the heads of the Grimm group with a hazy mist. Looking at it from the outside, the inside was blurry, and it was difficult to see the real scene clearly. At that moment, not only Alice, who was standing in front of Grimm, was about to collapse. Even the 2 wizards outside the cage had different expressions on their faces. Of course, Wizard Anderson was surprised at first, then he was gloating. The massacre that was supposed to be one-sided had become unpredictable because of the mysterious kid's sudden outburst. Although he could sense that his control over Mary was getting weaker and weaker due to Grimm's existence, he had long wanted to kill Grimm without batting an eyelid. But on such an occasion, Anderson was more than willing to see that hateful Alice's head bruised and bleeding. He still had time to deal with that kid, so Wizard Anderson let go of his worries and cheered for Grimm from the bottom of his heart for the first time. Some people were happy, some people were sad. While Anderson was silently watching the battle with a strange smile on his face, Poison Centipede Ender's face became cloudy and uncertain. Damn it, what kind of abilities does this kid have? Electric men, water men, fire men, these elemental puppets all had the strength of a quasi-wizard. How could he control them? Could it be that old bastard Anderson had a premonition that I would come, so he gave him these advanced magic items? But that didn't make sense. How could an advanced wizard apprentice control so many quasi-wizard elemental puppets? It was no wonder that Poison Centipede was so surprised. Summoning a normal elemental puppet required a lot of power of the will. If Grimm's magic puppets were not specially optimized and designed by the AI chip, a single lightning giant would have taken up more than half of his power of the will. How could he fight against Alice with a magic puppet team? In a corner outside the cage, Evil Worm Index silently stared at Grimm's methods. A huge wave of anger had already set off in his heart. Damn it! Damn it! How could this bastard have such terrifying methods? Putting himself in Endic's shoes, even he would have a headache when facing multiple quasi-wizard elemental puppets, not to mention Alice, who had always been alone. Just as everyone outside the cage was staring at the fierce battle that was about to break out in the golden birdcage, Alice, who was involved in it, was about to go berserk. Last time, the poor guy could only run away in panic. Now, he had summoned so many elemental puppets and looked like he was going to beat her up. Alice's heart felt like it was thrown into a pot of boiling oil. It was extremely torturous, and she couldn't believe it at all. But before she could think too much, the lightning giant with electric snakes dancing all over its body had already rushed towards her. In an instant, a powerful high-voltage electric current covered her entire field of vision. Alice didn't want to fight a powerful elemental puppet head-on, so she flashed away from where she was standing. This time, her teleportation target was right above that damn bastard's head. She had already made up her mind. After getting rid of those annoying elemental puppets, the first thing she would do was to cut that bastard into 8 or 10 pieces with her space cut. But to Alice's horror, when she stepped out of the void, the lightning giant also appeared next to her in a flash of lightning. Accompanied by a burst of crackling sounds, a lightning whip surrounded by electric light lashed at Alice's body with a whistling wind. Bastard, why is this lightning giant chasing after me so closely? This thought quickly flashed through Alice's mind. But before she could think of an answer, her figure flashed and she disappeared again. Just now, it must have been because her motive was too obvious, which allowed the lightning giant to capture her teleportation location. This time, it definitely won't be able to guess it. With the idea of teasing the lightning giant, this time, Alice chose the teleportation point to be 30 meters behind Grimm's group. As soon as she came out of the void, Alice pulled with both hands, preparing to pull out a space blade and ruthlessly attack the group of Grimm. But before the space crack in her hand stabilized into the ideal space blade, the terrifying lightning whip once again curled up from behind, fiercely lashing towards her back. Hashtag and %yen. At this moment, Alice's heart was filled with endless anger. But more than that, she felt a chill from the bottom of her heart. How is this possible? How did this brainless lightning giant find out where I would teleport twice in a row? This was simply an impossible task. With endless resentment, Alice once again disappeared on the spot. This time, after Alice appeared 60 meters to the left of Grimm's group, she did not rush to attack like last time. Instead, she carefully monitored the movements around her. Sure enough, less than a second after she teleported, the powerful lightning giant also appeared in a flash of lightning. And the position it appeared in was still 5 meters behind her. Even with Alice's black-bellied nature, she could not help but curse at this moment. Because when she glanced at the group of Grimm, hiding under the layers of water barriers, she found that each of them was secretly holding a magic wand of prophecy in their hands, and they were chanting to her. Chapter 122. At this moment, Alice could not restrain her anger. Once she started attacking, Alice, who had the innate spatial ability, showed off the terrifying power of spatial spells. As she gently tore with her fair and tender hands, spatial cracks that resembled necklaces of black pearls were created. As her hands kneaded the cracks, they transformed into all sorts of unimaginable weapons. A semicircular full moon scimitar, a dark spear that resembled a spear, a round exploding ball. As Alice shrieked, strange weapons beyond Grimm's imagination whizzed towards them, one after another. The cutting and penetrating power of the spatial fragments was simply appalling. A full moon scimitar silently streaked past Grimm's side, slicing through the waists of 2 of Grimm's doppelgangers along the way. The flame shield and high-temperature force field that the scimitar passed through were also damaged. Judging from the size and shape of the damage, it was exactly the same as the full moon scimitar. It seemed like ordinary defensive wizard spells would not be of much use in the face of Alice's space wizard spells. Any elemental spell would be like a soap bubble in front of a spatial spell of a higher level. The two were simply not on the same level. If Alice was allowed to attack as she pleased, even if Grimm summoned a sea of magic puppets, he would not be able to protect his life. Seeing that he could not defend against Alice's attacks, Grimm gritted his teeth and ordered the magic puppet squad to attack back at her, using their own attacks to suppress Alice's attack frequency. Thus, a gorgeous fireworks display erupted in the narrow space of the birdcage. Almost every time Alice appeared in a new location through teleportation, the lightning giant that was chasing after her would flood the area with its own violent arcs of lightning. Immediately after that, the fire djinn's long-range flame throw and the water golem's frost nova. Although the spatial barrier around Alice's body was known as indestructible, when faced with Grimm who could see through her weak point, as well as a group of valiant thugs who were not afraid of death, the newly erected spatial barrier would not even last a round of attacks before shattering into pieces. In such a short amount of time, she would only be able to complete a single long-range attack. Although she managed to teleport away in time before the spatial barrier outside her body shattered, the frequent teleportations, and attacks brought a very heavy burden to Alice. Every time the spatial barrier broke, she needed to teleport herself far away to repair the barrier before she could start the next round of attacks. After being teleported to Grimm's side, even with the agility of her spell casting and the sharpness of her space wizardry, she could only attack once before she had to escape. If he made the slightest mistake, he would be roasted by the bursting fireball and frozen by the azure ring of ice. What was even more terrifying was the bombardment of high-voltage electricity. Therefore, after only 7 rounds, Alice's lovely light yellow dress was torn into rags, and her beloved long golden hair stood up, burned into a black fluffy bird's nest by the violent electric current. Her exposed skin was covered with burn and frost scars. There were patches of green and purple on her skin, which made one's heart ache. On the other hand, Grimm's 12 mirror images had already been destroyed, and the remaining 3 were mixed with Grimm's main body, making it difficult to distinguish which one was the real one. As for the magic marionette team, it was firmly guarding Grimm's side, waiting for Alice to send herself to her death. The lightning giant floated in the air, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling all over its body. Its green body would occasionally flash with blinding lightning. Above its head, a huge thunderstorm was brewing, the funnel-shaped black clouds almost covering half of the space within the cage. Looking at the imposing lightning giant, Alice clenched her fists in anger, wishing she could immediately use the most violent space wizardry to completely wipe it off the face of this world. The reason why she had suffered such serious injuries was related to this hateful lightning giant. It had to be said that the attack speed and frequency of lightning wizardry was the fastest among all the wizardry. Every time the space barrier was broken, the lightning giant's damned lightning explosion would be able to catch Alice's figure in time and attack her. Moreover, the lightning giant's arcs of lightning actually had a slight paralyzing effect. If Alice's escape was slightly slower, she would end up being surrounded by elemental wizardry. As a direct descendant of Ender, Alice had hidden countless wizardry amulets and elemental amulets on her. But even so, she could not withstand the destruction of such violent elemental wizardry. The wizardry amulets used to isolate elemental attacks did not last more than 3 rounds before they exploded. The elemental amulets used to increase elemental resistance also shattered under the attack of the excessive elemental wizardry. In the end, Alice, whose elemental resistance continued to decrease, was purely relying on her tenacious and persistent will to fight. Her spiritual energy was about to be exhausted, so she ran to the periphery and drank a large bottle of wizardry potion. Moments later, she was full of vigor again, her spiritual energy bursting. Her wizard power was about to be exhausted, so she ran to the periphery again and drank a bottle of wizard power potion. Immediately, she was full of vigor and her wizard power was full. Relying on the support of the potions, Alice was like an unkillable cockroach, madly attacking Grimm's team of magic puppets again and again. The fire giant was cut into pieces twice by the violent space blades, but was summoned by Grimm for the third time. The bodies of the two watermen were also riddled with holes. If they were not elemental puppets that could automatically absorb the elemental energy drifting in the air to repair their bodies, they would have collapsed long ago. The only good thing about the magic puppets was the lightning giant. But even so, the lightning giant's body was dismembered by the continuous space wizard spell attacks, and it was torn to pieces. When Alice realized that it was difficult to directly attack Grimm, she finally changed her target and focused her attacks on the lightning giant that posed the greatest threat to her. This tactical adjustment soon received the best results. One of the lightning giant's arms disappeared. The winged essence crystal hidden in the giant's arm was cut into pieces by the space blades, directly disintegrating this part of the body, and could no longer be reassembled. Unfortunately, it was too late for her to change her guerrilla tactics. Just when Alice successfully destroyed the lightning giant's left arm, the lightning giant's fierce whip also shattered the space barrier and wrapped around her petite body. In the next second, a violent pillar of flames and an explosion of ice crystals engulfed the area where she was. Before Grimm could see the result of this attack, a violent, thunder-like, egg-shaped shockwave was released from where Alice was. In the area swept by the shockwave, the entire space was shattered like a mirror. Space shattered and the void trembled. All matter in that area would be annihilated and reformed, and all living beings in that area would instantly vanish. The lightning giant was the closest to the area. Although it had escaped early, most of its body was swept away by the shattering of the space. With a flash of lightning, the lightning giant appeared 300 meters away, but only half of its body and head remained of its originally tall and mighty body. As for the other parts of its body, they were all cut off by the spatial cracks. The fire giant's battered body collapsed once again. Grimm hid in the distance, the muscles on his face constantly twitching. The summoning of the fire giant on the Flame Lord's scepter had been used up, so he would not be able to summon them again today. The violent space shockwave spread outwards at an extremely fast speed. Even with Grimm's agility enhancement, he could barely escape from its attack range. The two watermen also turned into a wave and quickly escaped. Unfortunately, one of them was still caught up by the violent space shockwave and instantly turned into a spray of water. The remaining one barely managed to escape. He reassembled his body beside Grimm and stood on guard. When the spatial cracks in the core area of the space shockwave began to slowly close up, Grimm stopped and turned around to see Alice through the dense spatial fragments. At this moment, Alice was as violent and fierce as a god. Her long dress was torn to shreds, revealing her exquisite and lovely body. Her eyes were closed, her fists were clenched, and she was screaming towards the sky. The space shockwave that engulfed half of the space in the cage just now was the last attack she made under the intense stimulation of danger. After launching this attack, the power of space within her body was completely exhausted. Two streams of blood suddenly flowed from the corners of Alice's closed eyes. Her delicate and weak body was like a withered leaf that was shivering in the cold wind. Finally, she silently floated down from the sky. She lost. She was defeated in the fairest duel by the enemy she looked down upon. This ruthless reality stabbed Alice's heart. She, who had lost all her strength, just wanted to die in the cage and never have to face the reality that she was unwilling to admit. But the next moment, her cold and weak body was caught in a warm embrace. In the next moment, an unfamiliar robe draped over her body. Opening her blurry eyes and looking at the unforgettable figure, Alice muttered, "You bastard." Then she fainted. Grimm looked at the weak little girl in his arms and could not help but scream in his heart, "You can't die. You can't die. Otherwise, your wizard granny will definitely go berserk." The space shook. The scenery in front of him changed, and Grimm felt the weight in his arms lighten. Alice had been snatched away by Poison Woman Ender. He placed Alice on the ground and carefully examined her several times to make sure that she had only fainted due to overexertion. Only then did Poison Centipede Ender feel relieved. She turned around and stared at Grim for a long time until Grim's hair stood on end. Only then did Poison Woman Ender reveal a gloomy smile that was uglier than crying. "Kid, you're good. Very good. I'll remember you." After saying these words, Poison Woman Ender carried Alice on her flying broom and disappeared into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Only Quagmire and the others were left in the field, staring at each other in a daze. Chapter 123. Alice's incident took the shortest amount of time to settle down. Most of the tower's acolytes didn't even know what had happened before the incident was over. Not to mention Wizard Anderson, who rarely showed up before the acolytes. Even the evil Bug and Tick, who had been watching the whole process, had become much quieter and more taciturn. Apart from Mary, who wasn't surprised at all by Grim's behavior, the other two were extremely surprised. And Tick, in particular, was so disturbed that he couldn't even eat or sleep. Although Grim had never openly expressed his hostility towards him, as a bloodline acolyte with abnormal development, Tick had always followed the principle of attacking all potential enemies first and working hard to create an advantageous position in his circle of life. In the past, due to the limitations of his personal strength, he had to maintain a relative balance with the other two. However, after the breakthrough in the trial mission, he could no longer suppress his nature. He had already appeared and subdued the Mad Girl in Hawkeye. If he hadn't witnessed that strange kids' battle, he might still have thought that the scales of victory were more in his favor. Mary, aside from running fast, was useless in terms of attack and defense. She was no match for him at all. As for that Grim, he was just a high-ranking acolyte. What could he do? However, the battle between Alice and Grim in the birdcage deeply touched Tick. From that day onwards, he kept asking himself if he was the one fighting Grim in the birdcage. Would he be able to break through the defense of the group of elemental puppets and attack Grim? The answer was obviously not what he wanted to hear. From that day onwards, he became silent in a dark secret room. Tick sat quietly in a dark corner with a black robe draped over him. He didn't say a word. There was only a single magic torch on the far wall of the secret room. Not only did the dim, flickering light not illuminate the space, it made the place even more gloomy and frightening. There was no furniture in the secret room, not even a common table or chair. Even Tick was sitting cross-legged on the cold floor. Behind him, in a dark corner where the light couldn't reach, a mysterious bulging cocoon hung there. Rather than calling this a secret room, it was more like a nest. Beside Tick, countless black beetles swarmed the floor like a tidal wave. Here and there they ran, and there was a constant scrape of limbs on the floor. As if affected by these beetles, Tick's body, which was shrouded by the black robe, began to undulate. It was as if there were millions of beetles trying to dig their way out and merge with the beetles outside. Just as the black beetles were causing a ruckus, Tick finally raised his head. Two balls of dark green fireflies lit up under the shadow of his hood. A sharp insect hiss rang out in the secret room. Tick opened his mouth wide, and a strange insect head poked out from between his layered lips. The insect hissing just now had come from its mouth. Hearing this insect hiss, the originally restless insect swarm calmed down again. The black beetles gathered around Tick, as if they were subjects worshipping their lord. They crawled quietly and waited for their master's orders. Tick casually picked up a black beetle and tossed it into his mouth. Crunching noises could be heard as he chewed on the beetle. Stinky green worm juice spilled out from his open mouth. The pungent smell made the air in the secret chamber even more polluted. Is this the path you've chosen for yourself? It's really strange. An old voice abruptly sounded in the secret chamber. Lord Anderson, you've finally come. Tick raised his head slightly, as if he wasn't surprised by the sudden appearance of this voice. You knew I'd come? The old voice had a tinge of surprise. It was the voice of the master of the Swamp Tower, Anderson. Of course. As long as you're still the master of the tower, you'll contact me sooner or later. Then you should have guessed why I'm here, right? You want me to help you deal with Grim. Smart kid. You've guessed correctly. I didn't need you to get rid of that detestable brat. I'm sure you'll be more than happy to do it. Then, Lord Anderson, may I ask, do you still need someone else's help to kill an advanced acolyte? Don't tell me you'll bring about some unbearable consequences if you just kill him. The evil insect in Titch was obviously not an idiot. He didn't want to become someone else's weapon if he didn't figure this out. That's because I still want to control that little vampire. She's the key sample for my next blood study. However, with her relationship with that brat, if I directly attack her, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult to control her, Wizard Anderson finally said after a moment of silence. With that brat's fighting ability yesterday, do you think I can easily beat him? And Titch didn't care about Wizard Anderson's reason. Instead, he quickly changed to the next question. With my judgment, it'll be very, very difficult. If it's just you, you'll definitely die. However, you seem to have formed some kind of evil insect alliance. If you add in the strength of this alliance, it might be possible. But what's in it for me to do all this? Instead, I'll provoke that quasi-wizard Mary for nothing. What if I say I can make you stronger? Your contracted partner is that insect queen, right? A carrion beetle queen. Hee, to think that you could encounter such a good opportunity. It seems like you were really lucky in the past. Right now, you're probably worrying about how to increase your strength. Right now, your life is tied to that carrion beetle queen. Not only do you need to bear the burden of your own advancement, you also need to bear the burden of the carrion beetle queen's advancement. This way, although your half-insect body will give you an advantage against opponents of the same rank, it will drag you down a lot in terms of advancement speed. Did you eat one or two quasi-wizards in this trial mission? If you didn't have such a fortuitous encounter, you wouldn't have been able to successfully advance to a quasi-wizard. What about after that? Are you going to eat a few more wizards just to advance to a wizard? Lord Anderson, I understand what you mean. So, do you have any better suggestions for my current situation? Of course it's to strengthen yourself. Anderson reprimanded disdainfully. Although you are now a contracted creature with that insect queen and share your life, there's still a problem of dominance. If you become stronger, it will naturally become your best servant. However, if its evolution speed surpasses yours, even though you won't have to worry about your life, I'm afraid that it will be the true master of this body for most of the time. So, how can I quickly strengthen myself? Kakik. Kid, you've probably forgotten how I turned Mary into what she is today. As long as you join my witchcraft experiments, I guarantee that I can give you a body that is not any weaker than Mary's. I agree to this condition. So what do you need me to do? First, I need a drop of blood from that insect queen of yours. Only by obtaining its blood can I accurately concoct a mutation blood suitable for your physique. After pondering in silence for a long time, Intik finally nodded in agreement. Seeing that Intik had agreed, the Magus Anderson immediately urged him to hand over a drop of insect queen blood. Intik clenched his teeth and opened his lotus petal-like mouth. That insect head once again revealed a small part of its body. The insect hissed mournfully, causing the black carrion beetles around Intik to become violent and agitated. However, under Intik's pressure, that insect head still opened its mouth and spat out a drop of strange, smelly, sticky liquid. The air in the secret room trembled slightly. As soon as that drop of liquid left the insect head, before it could even land on the ground, it was caught by a ripple of the void. The light of teleportation flashed, and the liquid disappeared mysteriously. Intik's complex compound eyes shone brightly. It was obvious that he was secretly shocked by Wizard Anderson's tight control over the high tower. Kid, you're very wise. All right, with this thing, I can concoct the mutation blood very quickly. When you also have the bloodline of a vampire, that will be the time for you to shine. Sensing Wizard Anderson's powerful spiritual force, Intik slowly retreated from the secret room. That evil insect, Intik once again hid himself in the boundless darkness. In the darkness where no one could spy on him, the hissing sounds of insects could be heard incessantly. No one knew what he was intensely communicating with that insect queen. The entire space was filled with a sinister and strange atmosphere. Returning to his residence, Grimm once again entered the enclosed circle of life. deep meditation, reading books, experimenting with spells. These dry and dull activities had become his daily routine. For some reason, a deep sense of danger enveloped Grimm's body and mind, urging him to continuously accumulate knowledge and strengthen himself. He had a feeling that if he didn't use all his strength to run, something terrible would happen to him. Although it was hard to explain where this sense of danger came from and who it came from, Grimm believed it without a doubt and put it into action. Moreover, the few days of witchcraft research had brought him great benefits. With the help of the AI chip, the books on spells that he had accumulated in the past had all turned into secret knowledge that he could use at any time, filling in the gaps in his foundation of fire spells. Thus, unknowingly, the flame shield and high-temperature force field had become his, and his mastery of the body of flame had increased from 37% to 41%. Chapter 124. Ever since the last mandatory mission was completed, the Swamp Tower was like a blocked waterway that was suddenly opened up. The flowing water outside naturally began to affect the life inside. Obviously, Wizard Anderson was not happy about this change. However, facing the will of the entire scattered tower forest, even the rank 3 wizard from the Salubo family did not dare to go against it. What could he do? Therefore, when the apprentices returned one after another, the mission hall of the Swamp Tower that had been abandoned for a long time was once again opened. On the mission panel, there were countless real-time missions refreshed daily, ranging from high-level missions to hunting wild wizard-level monsters that only quasi-sorcerers could participate in, to trivial missions such as gathering resources, banishing monsters, investigating strange incidents, and so on. Even in the central continent, which was the main settlement area of human society, there were hundreds and thousands of strange incidents that left people speechless every day. Perhaps a monster had been spotted near a border town, or a village in the wilderness had suffered an inexplicable attack, or an expedition team had discovered a wild resource point. Whenever something like this happened, the Scattered Tower Forest would include it in their internal system and issue a limited-time mission to all the apprentices in the central continent. Using this method, the resources of the apprentices in the central continent were fully mobilized. Not only did they train the apprentices, but they also solved the hidden dangers at the border. In other words, they also helped the official wizards take on a large part of the protection mission. Grimm was able to suppress his temper and stay in his house, consolidating his witchcraft foundation bit by bit. However, Mary and Cabby could not do it. During this period of time, they were like red-eyed prisoners, quietly sifting through the mission hall every day to find their favorite mission. After all, Mary was a bloodline wizard. Relying on witchcraft knowledge alone was undoubtedly too slow. Only by continuously devouring the blood of powerful people could she quickly become stronger. Therefore, she was the most enthusiastic and diligent when it came to choosing missions. In less than a month, she had already completed 2 missions and earned herself 20 contribution points. Unfortunately, the missions she chose were all around the Swamp Tower. This was already a highly developed and familiar area of human society. Even if there were monsters that occasionally broke into this place, there would not be a single quasi-wizard level monster. Therefore, she had to look further ahead. Soon, a suitable mission appeared before her eyes. A war-creature camp that had migrated from the depths of the forest had suddenly appeared at the Timber Moss stronghold 7,000 miles away. Hence, the locals had issued a mission to recruit quasi-sorcerers or high-ranked acolytes, preparing to exterminate this camp. When Mary invited Glum to go with her, Glum refused. As an elemental wizard who was going to specialize in fire element, Grimm felt that he had to choose a more specific mission. The last time he soaked in the underground lava pool of the Dark Crypt, he had benefited a lot, so he wanted to find a volcanic environment to continue the evolution of his physique of flame. He had a feeling that if he wanted to advance to a wizard steadily, the body of flame would be very important to him. Fortunately, on the 3rd day after Mary left excitedly, KB, who had been waiting in the quest hall, immediately ran back to find Grimm. A quest suitable for him had appeared. This was a resource collection mission that was not very dangerous, and the execution location of the mission was inside a volcano that erupted regularly. Mount Cotopaxi was located at the eastern border of the Sydney region. It was rich in high-quality fire diamonds, which were also the main source of income for the local wizard families. Mount Cotopaxi was a very powerful active volcano. Out of the 12 months of every year, there would be 9 months where it was extremely dangerous. At this time, even the wizards were not willing to take the risk of entering its interior. It was only during its short 3-month break that Mount Cotopaxi would calm down a little, giving the nearby wizard families the opportunity to enter and collect the underground fire diamonds. Although the 3-month break was the volcano's temporary activity period, the temperature inside the volcano was still shockingly high. Moreover, most of the underground fire diamonds were at the edge of the lava pool or floating within the lava pool. If one wanted to collect them, of course, ordinary people would not be able to do it. Only those advanced sorcerer apprentices with elemental resistance could do it. Hence, during the volcano's temporary break every year, in order to increase the efficiency of the underground fire diamonds, the local wizard families would not only send their own members to collect them, but they would also issue missions to the public. Any acolyte who entered Mount Cotopaxi only needed to hand over a certain amount of underground fire diamonds at the end of the mission, and the rest would be their mission reward. Hence, every year before the volcano went into a temporary break, this mission would be issued immediately. Grimm rushed to the quest hall and accepted the underground fire diamond collection mission without any hesitation. Looking at the mission description, this mission was only open to 20 people, and Grimm was the 19th acolyte to accept the mission. Almost at the same time he clicked on the mission disappeared from the interface. The 20 spots were already filled. The mission required him to report to the mission point in the Sydney region within 15 days, so time was of the essence. Grimm immediately began to make the necessary arrangements. The first problem was how to settle KB the Goblin. KB the Goblin was timid and not a qualified warrior. Instead, he was interested in becoming a goblin merchant. Because of this, Grimm left KB in the Swamp Tower and gave him all the resources that he could not use for the time being. For example, the magic gems he brought back from the Dark Crypt, the magic equipment from the corpses of the fallen acolytes, and Grimm's remaining 4 bottles of concentration potion. These things were no longer suitable for Grimm's current path, so he gave them to KB, and they became the treasures of his newly opened goblin shop. These things were nothing in the eyes of the quasi-sorcerers who came from large families, but in the Swamp Tower where resources were scarce, it had become a magical place that all the low-level and mid-level apprentices sought after fervently since the day the gnome shop opened. Concentration potion. What's that? How come I've never heard of it before? A bottle of potion can increase spiritual force by 5 to 0. 7 points. How? How can there be such a magical potion in this world? As for the so-called side effects of the concentration potion, they were nothing in the eyes of these acolytes who would do anything to increase their strength. One had to know that in the Swamp Tower, most sorcerer apprentices would only get 2 or 3 points of mental strength through meditation every day. After all, there were very few people like Grimm who could enter deep meditation every time, so a 0.5 increase in spirit meant 3 months of hard meditation for them. In the past, they would have needed 3 months of hard meditation, but now they only needed 1 bottle of potion. How could such a magical thing not make them go crazy? Unfortunately, the exorbitant price made them flinch, and they could only watch with envious eyes as Eagle Eye Crusoe took all 4 bottles of potions in one go. The effect of the concentration potion on high-level acolytes was not as obvious as it was on mid-level acolytes. But for Crusoe, any increase in spiritual force was very precious. He already had 18 points of spiritual force. If he could increase it a little more, he might become a prospective sorcerer. Most low-level acolytes could not get their hands on high-grade items like the concentration potion, but the goblin's eyes were dazzled by the array of magic resources and magic materials. Grimm might only care about fire magic equipment that he could use, but the goblin cabbie was never picky. He used his first pot of gold to buy a large amount of local specialties from the Dark Crypt. Now that he displayed them in his shop, the acolytes in the tower immediately went crazy. Iron tree branches that increased HP regeneration by 1 point. Intelligence cloak that increased spiritual force regeneration by 1 point. Ogre gloves that increased strength by 1 point. Boots of speed that increased agility by 1 point. Small antidote. Gem of truth that could detect invisible creatures. Although the quality of these magic equipment was not high, they were very suitable for low-level acolytes, and the price was also within the limits of what they could afford. Thus, as soon as they were released, they immediately set off a craze in the Swamp Tower. The goblin cabbie's name also quickly spread. A goblin with such a huge wealth was, of course, very attractive. But anyone with a bit of brains knew that behind this goblin stood a prospective sorcerer and a high-level acolyte. As long as their brains were still functioning, they would know that offending this goblin was equivalent to offending the terrifying Blood Queen. Therefore, after settling Kobe down, Grimm packed his luggage and left the Swamp Tower silently. It would be a miracle if Grimm could make it there before the end of the mission if he had to walk or ride a carriage to get there. So after Grimm left the magic swamp, he quickly found a public flight point in a nearby town. There was an airship here that they could ride on. The so-called airship was a few grades lower than the airship belonging to the Wizard Association, but it was the most convenient form of transportation in the central region of the continent. When Grimm saw the airship for the first time, the muscles on his face twitched. Isn't this the giant hot air balloon from my previous life? A huge, long, cigar-shaped ball floated on top of it. The balloon was obviously sewn from a special magical beast's fur. Below the balloon was a huge cabin. The bottom floor was filled with goods, and the upper floor was occupied by people. It was quite a mystical place. Chapter 125. Pamela Town was the closest supply point to the Cotopaxi volcano. It was also the place where acolytes from other places could report in. It was dinner time when Grimm arrived at the town on a slow stagecoach. Pamela Town was a remote but not deserted town. It was not a big town with only one main street. It was the kind of place where you could see the whole town from the street. There were more than 10 wooden houses on both sides of the main street, which looked like normal residences. Apart from that, there was a tavern, a grocery store, a shabby motel, and a population of more than 100. That was all there was to the town. As soon as Grimm got off the stagecoach, he could faintly hear a loud rumble coming from the mountains in the distance. This sound was not an occasional occurrence. It had been there ever since Grimm approached the mountainous area. The sound was not that obvious from the outskirts. It sounded like thunder in the wild during winter, but when he arrived at the town, he immediately felt the power of nature. This was probably the sound caused by the continuous underground activity of the volcano. Grimm couldn't help but be curious about how the residents of the town lived in such an environment for so many years. What made them willing to endure such a harsh environment and stay here? Although it was almost time for Mount Cotopaxi to rest, the towering volcanic cone in the distance was still spewing thick smoke and dust into the air. The town was at the foot of the mountain, less than 7 miles away from the volcano. Due to the influence of the volcano, the sky was always gray. Both inside and outside the town, be it the buildings or the gravel roads, there was a thick layer of volcanic ash everywhere. The person waiting for Grimm in the motel was a high-ranked acolyte called Ivan. Judging from the badge on his gray robe, he should be from the local Jubal family. The Cotopaxi volcano belonged to their family. Without their permission, wizards from other places were not allowed to enter the volcano. Seeing that Grimm was only a high-ranked acolyte, Ivan did not seem to believe him. He could not help but ask coldly, "Even if the volcano is temporarily resting, it is not safe inside. There are terrifying hot air currents and lava monsters everywhere. Are you sure you can survive inside?" Grimm coldly scanned the lobby of the hotel. He waved his hand in the air a few times, and a rune burning with elemental flames floated in the air. His actions naturally attracted everyone's attention. The people sitting at the 6 or 7 wooden tables in the hall couldn't help but turned their heads to look in his direction. To be honest, ever since Grimm entered the threshold of the body of flame and was infused with energy from the underground lava, his 2-meter-tall body was quite eye-catching. His dark red long hair and the ferocious aura he exuded made him stand out even more, making him stand out from the crowd. Oh, so you are a fire element apprentice. As long as you avoid those annoying lava monsters, you might even be able to go deeper. Ivan nodded and handed a white stone to Grimm. That's right. Ivan nodded and took out a white stone and handed it to Grimm. This would be his pass to enter the interior of the volcano in a few days. Go talk to them. The people in the lobby are all acolytes who came here for a mission. If you can form a team, the mission will be a little easier. Ever since Ivan found out that Grimm was a fire element apprentice, he became much more enthusiastic. Grimm nodded in acknowledgement and slowly walked to the lobby. He slowly scanned the many unfamiliar faces around the table and finally chose to sit at a table by himself. His main purpose for this trip underground was to complete his body of flame. He was not interested in the rewards of this mission, so he did not have any intention of forming a team with others. Thus, as soon as he arrived, he put on a cold and unapproachable appearance in order to avoid unnecessary trouble. Sorcerer apprentices were all sharp-witted. Since Grimm had put on such a show, naturally, no one would bother him again. On the other hand, Grimm took the opportunity to observe everyone's situation, so that he had a clear idea of what was going on. The lobby of the small hotel was not big, and the lighting was extremely dim. There were about 17 acolytes sitting there. Only 2 of them were prospective sorcerers, and the rest were advanced sorcerers like Grimm. This was in line with the characteristics of this mission. In order to collect resources in the underground volcano, one had to endure the extreme environment and deal with the lava monsters, fire spirits, and other elemental creatures that lived in the volcano. Advanced sorcerers were the lowest requirement for this mission. Grimm was sure that most of these advanced sorcerers had elemental affinity with the fire element. Even if the rest were not, they were still very confident in themselves. The reason why there were so few prospective sorcerers was purely because collecting resources was a very important task. If they were lucky, they might be able to find a fire diamond mine at the top of the volcano after the lava subsided. However, if they were unlucky, they might end up with nothing even after 3 months. If that happened, not only would they not get the mission reward, they would also have to pay for their share of the mission. Therefore, unless there was a special need, prospective sorcerers would not be willing to try their luck at the underground volcano. After getting a rough idea of the acolyte's situation, Grimm quickly filled his stomach and went back to his room. He did not go out again. He had arrived early. There were still 5 days before the volcano stopped, so he did not take a single step outside. Even his 3 meals were served to him by the waiter. He used these few days of free time to study the flame barrier. He felt that this follow-up defensive spell was the most suitable for his physique of flame. If he could master early, he might be able to form a protective flame similar to that of the Abyssal Fire Lord. At that time, anyone who wanted to attack him would have to endure the continuous fire damage, which was more in line with his sinister mentality of killing his enemies without leaving a trace. During this time, 2 or 3 acolytes had come to visit him, wanting to recruit him into their exploration team, but Grimm had tactfully rejected them. Thus, after a few visits, all the advanced sorcerers who wanted to explore the underground volcano knew that there was a guy who wanted to go underground alone. Acolytes who could become advanced sorcerers were not simple-minded. They all understood that anyone who dared to do this was someone who was extremely confident in himself, so no one said anything about it. However, there were still many who were secretly waiting to see Grimm's reaction. Soon, the day that everyone had been waiting for arrived. On this day, the rumbling that had been lingering in everyone's ears finally stopped. The gray pillar of smoke in the distance began to scatter, and the volcanic ash that had been falling all day long also began to lessen and finally stopped. Grimm, who had been quietly reading in his room, felt the changes in the outside world. He opened the wooden window to take a look, then immediately packed up everything around him and walked out of the room. There were many acolytes who were also prepared. After greeting each other in the corridor, they all gathered in the lobby of the inn. Ivan, who was in charge of leading the team, was already waiting there. After waiting for another 15 minutes, when all 20 acolytes had arrived, everyone filed out and followed Ivan to the foot of the volcano. A distance of 7 or 8 miles was nothing to these acolytes. In less than 15 minutes, they arrived in front of a natural cave halfway up the volcano. 2 quasi-sorcerers from the Jubal family were already waiting there. After checking everyone's pass, they let them in. The cave was not big, only about 20 square meters. It was filled with crisscrossed rock peaks and limestone. This might be a lava passageway that led straight to the depths of the volcano. There were no moss or lichens or the like here, and on both sides of the rock walls, there were thick cracks and deep ravines everywhere. Scorching streams of air that could instantly cook a person were continuously released from within. Perhaps the underground lava had just receded not long ago. Even the ground here was still boiling hot. The tunnel was filled with a pungent smell of sulfur. Without special methods, a normal person would only need to stay in this dirty air for a quarter of an hour to be invaded by the terrifying fire poison, turning the trachea and alveoli into blood bags. However, this kind of environmental test was, of course, not a problem for the acolytes who dared to come here. Each of them was covered in a colorful protective shield, isolating them from outside interference. Grimm did not reveal his body of flame, but instead, he added a high-temperature force field to himself. He silently looked around. There were 8 acolytes like him who had added a fire defense, which was almost half of the 20 acolytes. The rest were either of the earth or wind element. There was not a single water element. Presumably, those with affinity with water elements would not be willing to come here to suffer. Compared to other elemental systems, water element was not only extremely difficult to gather in such an environment, but the power and effect of spells would also be reduced by 70%. As long as they were not stupid, they would not come here to be tortured. Now that they were here, everyone was basically minding their own business. A few acolytes who had formed teams gathered together, and the fire element acolytes added an elemental defense. Without saying a word, they went into the tunnel. The remaining heat in the tunnel had not dissipated yet. In such a narrow environment, if there was an unexpected large-scale eruption of hot air, even high-grade acolytes would be in great danger. Therefore, everyone told each other to take care and dispersed into different tunnels in 2s and 3s, disappearing into the depths of the underground. Grimm noticed that the Jubal family's acolytes did not follow the outsiders into the tunnel. It seemed that they were more familiar with the terrain here and had more convenient places to go. They did not need to rely on luck like the outsiders. Chapter 126. Compared to the underground world of the gloomy crypt, the lava caves here were much more dangerous. The lava tunnels here were all cracks and lava-flowing pipes in the solid mountain after intense geological activity. There was a lot of uncertainty in them. Maybe when you were walking in a red tunnel, you would be burnt to a crisp by a sudden gust of hot air from a crack on the sidewall. It was also possible that a single misstep would cause him to fall into a bottomless chasm, into some soul-sucking pool of lava. Although the volcanoes had gradually entered a temporary rest period, intense geological activity still existed in some parts. If the rumbling ground subsided around you, you might be crushed into meat paste by the sudden closure of the cave or the dislocation of the rock strata. Therefore, you had to pay more attention to the stability of the surrounding rock strata while walking here. Absolute safety did not exist. Every apprentice had to be careful to avoid being involved in sudden geological changes. The danger did not only exist in the volcanoes, but also in the strange creatures that lived in this area. Fire spirits, lava hounds, lava monsters, fire lizards, flame imps, flame guards. There were dozens of flame creatures with names, and the unknown creatures were even more difficult to count. These flame creatures lived and ate fire, and they treated this volcano as their home. They built a unique food chain in this lava world. At the top of the food chain was naturally the terrifying molten core giants. They were like a group of extremely intelligent flame giants with terrifying elemental abilities that were no weaker than human wizards. Unfortunately, their lives were too dependent on the environment. Once they left the volcano world, their power would continue to decline. Therefore, all the molten core giants lived in the deepest part of the underground volcano and were rarely seen in the outside world. It could be said that the ability of a wizard apprentice was not enough to enter the depths of the volcano world, so it was impossible for them to have any contact with them. In the volcano world, the bottom of the food chain was probably those annoying flame imps. They looked like gnomes, but their skin was crimson red. They did not have flesh and blood, but the product of the combination of a ball of flame, origin, and some broken consciousness. They moved through the lava tunnels while chattering, looking for areas with dense fire elements. They would also spontaneously attack any outsiders that entered the area, and their method of attack was extremely simple flame arrows. Once they realized that they couldn't defeat their opponents, they would jump into a lava pool or a stream of flames, and then instantly run to another place. Once a treasure hunter let go of a flaming imp, his surroundings would be flooded by a group of flaming imps in no time. But these flaming imps were so poor that it made one's hair stand on end. Even if you tried your best to destroy them, you would only get a pile of volcanic ashes. There would be no other spoils of war. The flaming imp's price-performance ratio was far inferior to the fire spirit. Although the fire spirits were also at the bottom of the food chain in the volcano world, they could at least get some broken elemental cores by eliminating them. It was much better than having nothing. The Inferno Imp had flame arrows and flame teleportation. If it was in the outside world, it would be a difficult elemental creature to deal with. However, in this volcanic world where fire resistance was abnormally high, their strange abilities were basically useless against other fire creatures. That was the fundamental reason why they were at the bottom of the food chain. Grimm did not choose to travel with anyone else. Instead, he entered a lava tunnel on his own, heading downwards at a rapid pace. There were no straight paths here, nor were there any regular tunnels. Everything revolved around the terrain, and there were many forks in the road. The volcano world was like a super huge beehive. The road inside was bumpy, and there were many tunnels and caves connected one after another. Walking inside, if one did not have a way to identify the path, it was very easy to fall into a maze and die of heat after running out of food and water. But of course, Grimm did not have this problem. As he went deeper into the volcano world, his entire body and flesh became restless, excited by the density of the fire element particles here. Here, even if he did not put up an elemental defense, the hazy red light around him could not hurt him, and could even bring him considerable benefits. But for the sake of appearance, he still had to put up a high-temperature force field to protect his clothes from being ignited by the high temperature here. After all, he was a human, and did not have the habit of running naked like fire creatures. There was no map, and there was no need for one. Grimm did not hesitate at all in front of the hundreds of forks, and went straight into the depths of the underground with large strides. The thing that guided him was the density of the fire element particles in the air. He was not here to search for treasures, but to bathe here, so he went where the density of the fire element particles was higher. The bumpy and winding road might have deceived him, but the fire element particles floating in the tunnel would not. So he arrived in front of a small lava pool without any deviation. This was not the depths of the volcano world, but a natural depression. Hence, when most of the molten lava retreated back into the ground, a small portion of it was left behind, gathering into a small lava pool. At this moment, a group of Inferno imps and a lava hound were gathered there. They were bobbing up and down in the lava pool, happily using the scorching lava to water their bodies. Amongst these monsters, the lava hound had a higher status, occupying almost half of the space. The rest of the fire imps could only squeeze in the other half, not daring to take even half a step closer to the lava hound. Seeing a human suddenly come out of a tunnel, the lava hound with a stronger sense of territory was the first to jump out of the lava pool, blocking Grimm's path. It lowered its body slightly, opened its flaming mouth, and let out a threatening growl. "This is a lava hound?" Grim stopped in his tracks, his black eyes flashing with blue light as he scanned the internal structure of the strange creature in front of him. It was a flaming creature comparable in size to a tiger on Earth in his previous life. Its body was mostly made of semi-molten lava, and the surface of its body was surrounded by raging flames of scorching heat. When the lava hound opened its mouth to threaten Grim, the scorching lava that flowed from its fangs even eroded the floor in front of it into a small hole. This meant that the lava in its body was more terrifying than natural lava, and the fire element in it was even more corrosive. A moment later, the information that the AI chip had scanned was projected into Grim's mind. Lava Hound, a unique semi-elemental creature of the volcano world. Strength, intermediate acolyte. Stats, strength 9. Agility, 13. Vitality, 10. Spirit, 8. Individual abilities, rapid assault, flame leap, flame breath, ferocious bite. Some of this information was obtained from scanning the body structure of the lava hound, while others were supplemented from books. As soon as the information from the two fused, all of its secrets were revealed to Grim. Although this lava hound had the strength of an intermediate acolyte, according to the AI chip, in this special environment, ordinary intermediate acolytes would have a hard time dealing with it. Just as Grim was quickly analyzing all the secrets of the lava hound, his silence had thoroughly enraged the other party. The lava hound's powerful hind paws stomped on the floor with great force. The lava hound's sturdy body pounced through the air and heavily collided with Grim's temporary flame shield. A dull thud resounded. The lava hound brushed past the fire shield and flashed to Grim's side. With a twist of its heavy body, it adjusted its direction and pounced once more. At this moment, the 4 deep claw marks on the fire shield had yet to disappear. The lava hound slammed into the fire shield once more. This time, the fire shield could no longer withstand the attack of the flame claw, nor could it withstand the impact of the lava hound's heavy body. With a bang, it exploded into flaming fragments that filled the sky. Chapter 127. When the area quietened down again, there were no longer any flaming creatures in sight. The rock python was responsible for patrolling the perimeter while Grim took off his clothes and walked into the lava pool naked. The boiling magma soon drowned his ankles, calves, and thighs. Every time the bubbles that were stirred up burst, a scorching air current that was hundreds of degrees Celsius would be spat out from inside. However, Grim did not seem to feel anything and continued to go deeper, allowing the sticky lava to engulf his body and head. As the terrifying heat continued to pour into his body, Grim felt every cell in his body rejoice. However, while the fire elemental energy continued to rise, he could not feel the joy of his spiritual force increasing along with his body like before. It was as if the lava pool lacked a basic element that could allow his physique of flame to evolve. Grim stood up from the pool of fire and looked at the area with a puzzled expression. Finally, he could not help but ask, Chip, analyze the situation. What is preventing the physique of flame from evolving? In the next second, countless pieces of analysis information rolled past his eyes and finally disappeared one by one, leaving only the final conclusion in front of him. The reason why the lava pool could not evolve the physique of flame was most likely due to the fact that it could not reach the core of the volcano. This was only a small area left after the lava lake retreated, and it had lost direct contact with the core of the volcano. It seemed that there was no point in just wandering around the periphery. Only by going deep underground and finding the lava lake that connected to the core would he be able to make this trip worthwhile. However, bathing in the lava pool wasn't without its benefits. Grim's psychic power penetrated into the sticky magma and soon found something strange under the wall of the pool. Grim walked to the southeast corner of the lava pool and used a high-temperature force field to force away the magma nearby, exposing the pool wall that was red from the heat. Grimm transferred the Flame Lord's scepter to his left hand and gathered fire elemental energy in his right hand before stabbing it into the soft wall. When he pulled his right hand out, he found a rock the size of an egg in his palm. As the fire elemental energy surged into the wall, the outer layer of the rock began to soften like hot wax, revealing the blazing red light within. An underground fire diamond. It was only the size of a thumb, and, judging from its quality, it was only average. However, even such an ordinary fire diamond could be sold for 120 magical crystals in the Mystic Art store. As for the acolytes who entered the volcano this time, they only needed to hand over 5 similar fire diamonds to complete the quota of the mission. As for the other rewards, they could all be used as personal rewards for the acolytes. Since this place wouldn't be of much help to him, Grimm didn't want to stay here any longer. He hurriedly put on his clothes and led the rock python to the next fire elemental concentration point. An hour later, although the underground cave was still empty, there was a strange sound of light footsteps. A moment later, a blurry human figure appeared at the edge of the pool of fire. It was a young man with shoulder-length brown hair. His face was cold and grim, and his exposed neck was covered with mysterious witchcraft runes, which added a strange feeling to him. He was one of the 2 foreign quasi-sorcerers that Grimm had marked out. As soon as he arrived at the cave, he was slightly stunned. As a quasi-sorcerer, he had always acted alone and didn't want to team up with rookies. With his strange invisibility ability, most fire creatures couldn't detect his existence. This allowed him to avoid most of the pointless battles and arrive here without a hitch. However, judging from the burning lava left behind by the lava hounds and the volcanic ash left behind by the flame imps, as well as the traces left by the large reptiles, he was sure that someone had already entered this place. Tamora silently stood at the edge of the pool of lava and quickly scanned the area with his mind power. However, he didn't find anything. It seemed that even if there was something here, it had already become the spoils of war of the previous intruder. How could someone be faster than him? Could it be another quasi-sorcerer? With some doubts in his mind, Timor could only change his route at the last minute. He didn't want to follow behind another strong person and eat the leftovers. 3 months was enough for him to dig up enough magic crystals to last him for 2 years. For the rest of the journey, Grimm was no longer as cautious as before. Instead, he became unrestrained and passionate. He sat on the body of the rock python that he summoned, allowing it to rush through one lava passage after another like a road roller. As long as the passage was big enough, he could rush through it in one go. If the passage was not big enough, it would become big enough after the rock python squeezed through. After all, with the frequency at which the rock python repaired its body, some damage to its body would not cause it any harm. Along the way, the rock python would directly crush the small fire creatures it encountered. If it was a medium fire creature, it would smash it into pieces before crushing it. As for the desperate counterattacks from the fire creatures, they could only add 1 or 2 insignificant wounds to the rock python's body. They could not stop the rock python's unstoppable momentum. Grimm didn't bother to pick up the flints and shattered cores dropped by the fire creatures. He let the rock python swallow them all and would slowly sift through them when he needed a rest. Moreover, there would be lava pools of varying sizes at every point where the fire elements were concentrated. The only thing Grimm had to do was use his mental strength to penetrate through the sticky lava to find the underground fire diamonds that were hidden in the rock strata or wrapped in the rocks. Of course, he would occasionally find some magical gems or special metal ores. Thus, as he rushed forward, Grimm saw a few other common fire creatures. Fire spirits could be said to be the most numerous in the volcano world. They were usually human-shaped flames that were more than a meter tall and could walk freely. They had no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. They did not have any internal organs. Their bodies were made up of steaming flames and could not stray too far from the lava pools. Against this kind of fellow that had no physical body and was just an amalgamation of elements, the rock python could rely on its heavy and tough body to directly crush it, so it didn't even have to fight. Grim would not be able to obtain any spoils of war from such a poor wretch. The fire lizards were a type of fire-type magical beast. They had flesh and blood and liked to ambush their enemies in the dark like normal large lizards. However, the underground fire lizards not only had thick skin and flesh, but also had the ability to spit fire and had outstanding fire resistance. They liked to hide at the edge of the lava pools and wait for fire creatures to fall into their trap. The highly concentrated flints and cores in the bodies of the fire creatures were their favorite delicacies. Before Grim entered the underground, he had already done some preliminary research on the volcano world. In order to save as much time as possible, he would not come out until the end of the time limit. The most urgent problem was the problem of food and water. Apart from the water pouch in his storage belt, Grim could also gather water elements to solve the problem of drinking water. Although he had an affinity with the fire element, and it was difficult to summon a waterman in a lava volcano, it was not a problem for him to solve the problem of drinking water. The only problem left was food. The amount of food Grim had brought with him was only enough for a week. No matter how much food they had, it would be difficult to preserve them in such an extreme environment. Grim could not feed on fire like a flaming creature, so it was necessary for him to search for a new type of food underground. In the volcano world, the only creatures with flesh and blood that could be used as food were the fire lizards. However, the flesh of the fire lizards was tough and coarse, and their blood was hot and fishy. If not for the fact that the fire energy in their flesh was beneficial to the body, Grim would not be willing to torture his stomach. These small to medium-sized fire creatures were not a threat to Grim, but the stronger lava monsters and flame guards were difficult to deal with. The lava monsters and lava hounds were basically two creatures made from the same mold, except that one was humanoid and the other was canine. As for the lava hounds, the lava pythons only needed to ram and bite them to tear them apart. But against the lava monster, this trick was no longer useful. The lava monsters were humanoid fire monsters with intermediate intelligence. Their bodies were covered with volcanic rocks of all sizes, and normal spells would not be able to penetrate their hard rock armor. They were also extremely cunning, and would not be unable to differentiate between the enemy and their allies like the lava hounds. The lava monsters loved to guard the lava pools that they regarded as their home, and would not allow outsiders to take a single step inside. The lava monster's attack style was similar to that of a fire magus, with spells such as Flintstone's Throw, Ignite, Flamestorm, and the like. Whenever they wanted, they would use fire spells to turn the entire lava cave into a sea of fire. Faced with these long-range attacks, Grim could only command the rock python to rush into the lava pool and engage in melee combat. Although the rock python and the lava monsters were both high-grade creatures, the rock python had the advantage in size and strength. Both sides engaged in an earth-shattering melee battle in the lava pool. The final victor would be the rock python, which was larger, more powerful, and had a higher vitality. However, after a fierce battle, the rock python's thick and sturdy body was successfully slimmed down. After all, it was only an Earth-type monster mantis. Fighting against an opponent of the same rank in its opponent's territory, the immersion in the lava pool had caused great damage to its body. Therefore, every time a lava monster was killed, the rock python's thick body would shrink by at least 3 times. Chapter 128. The lava monster looked like a human, but the flame guard was a pure fire creature that had been reincarnated from an evil creature. It was tall and ferocious, and its body was covered in sharp rocks and thorns. Its strength was about the same as the rock python's. Therefore, when it swung its huge stone fists and clashed with the rock python, the entire lava cave trembled and swayed violently. The two enormous creatures were entangled in each other's embrace, tumbling and rolling around in the cave. The noise they created was no less than a world-class battle between monsters. Even Grim could only retreat to avoid the splashing rock fragments and falling rocks from above. After a few minutes of fighting, the rock python finally showed signs of losing. After all, the rock python's body was just an ordinary rock that had been put together temporarily, while the flame guard's body was made of hard ores and special rock it had collected from various places when it was patrolling underground. Therefore, once it lost its advantage in size and strength, the rock python would not be able to defeat such a fierce opponent. However, for Grimm, magic puppets had always won through numbers. If one couldn't defeat it, then he would send two. A moment later, the second rock python appeared in the midst of a series of loud, rumbling sounds. With the appearance of the second rock python, the flaming guards, which had been fierce and domineering a moment ago, were quickly defeated. It could not be helped. No matter how fierce it was, it could not withstand the entanglement of a rock python, which was focused on biting its head. The two rock pythons had a clear division of labor, and with their exquisite cooperation, they cut off the flame guard's control over its body. A man without a head would die, and a snake without a head would not be able to move. Although the flame guard had the strength of a quasi-magus, once its core was taken out, its huge body became an empty shell, and it collapsed in an instant. Grimm had been searching for quasi-magus level fire crystal cores recently, but he could not find anything that satisfied him. One of the main reasons was that fire creatures were very difficult to deal with. For example, the flaming guard that had been killed had a peerlessly tough iron rock body. Ordinary witchcraft was completely ineffective against it. On top of that, it also possessed a powerful fire elemental ability and a melee ability that made one despair. With these two combined, even if a human quasi-shaman came, they would only think of ways to take a detour and would never fight it with their lives on the line. Therefore, in the face of such a terrifying fire monster, other than official sorcerers, only those peak perspective sorcerers had the confidence to take it down with minimal losses. Only the quasi-sorcerer's core of consciousness had any value on the flame guards. If human quasi-sorcerers didn't have the ability to kill them quickly, it would be a tragedy. Usually, they would only be able to obtain a broken core of consciousness. All these factors added up together, resulting in the scarcity of quasi-magus level fire crystal cores. But now that Grimm had successfully harvested one of the two rock pythons, he couldn't help but smile from the joy in his heart. Other than working hard to expand his knowledge of witchcraft, he spent the rest of his time sculpting and polishing his demon puppet squad, working hard to formalize, quantify, and systemize them. The most important advantage of the demon puppet squad was their numbers, followed by the type of comprehensive and elite warrior training. When fighting in different areas, different types of demon puppets could display great differences in battle power. For example, when Grimm fought the flower spirit in the Dark Cave last time, if he only had rock pythons, he wouldn't be able to directly threaten the flying flower spirit, even if he summoned 10 or 20 rock pythons. Therefore, the lightning giants were able to make full use of their advantages of fast movement and fierce long-range firepower. But in today's situation, no matter how powerful the lightning giant's thunderstorm and high-voltage electric current were, it wouldn't be able to penetrate the thick skin of the flame guards. Once elemental witchcraft was ineffective, a lightning giant at the peak of quasi-magus level could not even compare to a rock python with the power of a senior sorcerer apprentice. It was not hard to imagine that in the future, when fighting enemies on the sea, the water puppets would undoubtedly be the most powerful ones. Therefore, the diversity and quantification of battle magic puppets had become Grimm's goal in the near future. Grimm already had a certain amount of demon puppets with earth, wind, and water elements, but he still couldn't build an army of demon puppets with fire crystal cores. One of the main reasons was the scarcity of quasi-magus level fire crystal cores. But today, with this fire crystal core, Grimm saw the dawn of his future army of fire puppets. Hence, under his intentional command, the two rock pythons traversed the underground lava tunnels one after the other. When they came across ordinary lava pools, they would pass through them without wasting any more time on the ordinary fire creatures. Instead, they would focus on killing the flame guards. Therefore, as Grimm moved further down, apart from 2 fire diamonds, 7 fire stones, a large pile of different types of gemstones and ores, he also found 4 quasi-magus level fire crystal cores. That was what made Grimm the most. After running for 2 days in the Fire Mountain world, Grimm finally went through the shallow layer and stepped into the core area of the underground volcano. From here on, Grimm could no longer be as wild as before because this was the living area of the molten core giants. If he provoked them, even Grimm, who had a powerful demon puppet team, would not be able to handle it. The newly born molten core giants basically had the power of high-level wizard apprentices, and the adult molten core giants were basically powerful wizards. If not for the fact that they could not live without the endless fire energy of the underground volcano, the wizard continent might have a different kind of wizard apprentice. The adult molten core giants definitely had wizard-level fire crystal cores in their bodies, which were rare treasures that even Grimm drooled over. However, dealing with the molten core giants was not as easy as dealing with the flame guards. Although the flaming guards were powerful and intelligent, they were wild monsters after all. They were often alone and could easily be ganged up on by acolytes. However, the intelligence of the molten core giants was not inferior to that of human wizards. They also lived in the core area of the volcano in the form of large families. Therefore, if you wanted to touch any one of them, you would probably attract the interference of a group of molten core giants. At that time, it would not be the demon puppet team attacking the molten core giants, but a group of molten core giants attacking the demon puppet team. Grimm shuddered at the thought of such a horrifying scene. After entering the core area of the volcano world, the first thing that Grimm saw was the endless sea of lava. It was as if a huge hole had suddenly appeared in the underground space, and what filled the hole was the slowly flowing, red, sticky lava. Grimm had seen many lava pools of various sizes along the way, but this was the first time he had seen a sea of lava. To be honest, when Grimm stepped out of the lava tunnel and saw the still, red lava sea in front of him, he almost stopped breathing. In a huge space that stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of scorching black and red lava was flowing slowly. The surface of the lava sea was more than 100 meters away from the top of the cave, and the whole space was illuminated by the thick streams of lava that erupted from time to time. In addition to the shockingly high temperature of the lava, there were also some strangely shaped rocks floating in the sea of lava. Some were only the size of a wash basin, while others were the size of a house. They floated on the surface of the lava, resembling islands. On these islands of varying sizes, the thick rock pillars and peaks were embedded with strange gems of different colors. Among them, there was no lack of fist-sized fire diamonds. Even fire diamonds the size of a human head could be found. As far as the eye could see, the sea of lava was like a huge treasure trove of magic, lying there quietly waiting for the arrival of those fated to come. However, the environment here was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. According to the AI chip's detection, the temperature at the edge of the sea of lava was close to 1,000 degrees, and the temperature in the inner regions had soared to more than 2,000 degrees. In such an environment, without the support of spells, even a quasi-magus would instantly turn into a pile of bones. Grimm, on the other hand, had to rely on the Flame Lord's scepter and his affinity with fire to control this cruel environment. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to even get close to this area, let alone dive into the sea of lava to train. Grimm waved his hand to disperse the 2 rock pythons and put away the magic puppet cores. After carefully inspecting the surroundings, he hid his equipment and clothes in a pile of rocks, then clenched his teeth and jumped into the sea of lava. Piercing pain. A piercing pain. The moment he entered the sea of lava, the terrifyingly high temperature instantly caused Grimm to hover between life and death. His entire body felt like it was being pierced by tens of thousands of steel needles, and the intense pain caused Grimm's consciousness to blur. Like a steak placed on a frying pan, his skin and flesh sizzled in the boiling magma. Thick black smoke was emitted from Grimm's body, and a burnt smell began to fill the air. Compared to the torment of his flesh and blood, Grimm's spiritual world was unprecedentedly lively. Fire elemental energy surged into his body like a flood, constantly cleansing his body and improving his spiritual sea bit by bit. Along with the fire elemental energy, there were obviously other mysterious factors that were hard to distinguish and capture, constantly strengthening Grimm's innate fire elemental energy and forging a new body of fire for him. Usually, only those elemental sorcerers who had successfully advanced to a higher level could withstand such a violent body transformation by controlling their physical bodies with their powerful mental strength. This was also a necessary process for elemental magi to have an elemental avatar. Only when the body and spiritual force were of the same frequency and quality would they be able to lay a solid foundation for the elemental essence conversion. Chapter 129. Only tribulations could bring true growth to a person. The edge of the lava sea was filled with boundless fire energy, and it did not just provide Grimm with fire elemental energy. His affinity with fire was like a fish in water here, allowing him to feel the progress of his physique of flame at all times. If not for the AI chip in his mind constantly updating the progress of his physique of flame, Grimm would not have been able to endure the burning pain and would have chosen to give up. Ever since his physique of flame had stopped progressing in the dark crypt crimson world, under the impact of the even more violent fire energy this time, the progress of his physique of flame, which had been stuck at 17%, skyrocketed, leaving him in a state of pain and happiness. 18%, 19%, 20%. The strengthening of his innate fire elemental energy also led to the evolution of his body. Some of the organs and flesh that were not compatible with his innate fire elemental energy were burned to ashes by the surging fire elemental energy. New parts of his body quickly regenerated under the support of the powerful energy, replacing the old organs. This process was originally chaotic, and he relied on his body's instincts to carry it out. However, with the AI chip's fine control and control of his body, Grimm was able to ignore the intense pain of his body and focus on the balance between the rate at which the fire elemental energy entered his body and the rate at which his body regenerated. Although it was good to evolve both his spirit and body, he needed to grasp the appropriate degree. Without a strong physique, normal acolytes would not be able to withstand the violent transformation of their bodies. Hence, after soaking in the lava sea for half an hour, the progress of his physique of flame rose from 17% to 23%, and Grimm had no choice but to give up. We climbed to the top of the cliff that was piled with rubble. Boiling hot lava flowed down his body, burning the volcanic rocks under his feet and making sizzling sounds. After the lava flowed down, an ugly body of black and red was revealed. The black part was the charred skin, which began to peel off and fly in the air in the terrifyingly high temperature. The red part was the regenerated flesh, which was exposed to the high temperature. However, it was obvious that his resistance to fire was much higher than before. Although the body of the past was part of Grimm's body, it was not completely compatible with fire elemental energy. Now, after being transformed by the abundant fire energy, and combined with his powerful flesh regeneration ability, he had formed a body that was most compatible with his innate ability. However, such a body transformation couldn't be accomplished overnight. Grimm's physique was still too weak. If the transformation was too fierce, it would easily cause his entire body to lose balance and collapse. That was why he only tried it briefly. The moment the AI chip detected that his physical body had reached its limit, it sent him a warning of danger, and he immediately stopped the training of the body of flame. At this moment, his body looked a little thinner than before, but he seemed more capable. However, compared to the glory on the surface, his internal organs, bones, and tendons were already covered in cracks and hidden injuries of various sizes. Before his body's injuries were healed, he had to temporarily stop this overly wild body modification. After stopping by the shore for a while, Grimm waited for himself to adapt to his new body. Only then did he put on his clothes, and without looking back, he entered the densely packed lava tunnels on the walls. About half an hour's journey away from the lava sea, Grimm found a semi-sealed, fiery lava cave. He made some simple modifications to it, and turned it into his temporary camp. During this period of time, he would probably have to stay here day and night, waiting for his body to recover. He released a rock python and had it use its thick body to block the only entrance. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about being ambushed while he slept. The rock python's body was made of rock anyway. As long as it curled its body and suppressed the undulations of its consciousness, it would be able to deceive people by pretending to be a wall. In a depression in the middle of the cave, Grimm took out a pile of flint to use as fuel and began to cook a magic energy meal. Since they were both fire-type magical beasts, Grimm's stomach rumbled with hunger after a simple barbecue. It had to be said that with the improvement of his physique and strength, some of the overly tough and sour magical beast flesh had also become part of his diet. Although his cheeks would ache for a long time after he finished eating and drinking every time, he felt that his cheeks would ache for a long time. Although his cheeks would ache for a long time after he finished eating and drinking, he felt that the pain was worth it. After finishing the magic energy meal and gulping down a gallon of clean water, Grimm lay down on the blanket in satisfaction and fell into a deep sleep. This time, he did not meditate. His broken body could not withstand any more changes, and the only thing he needed the most right now was pure sleep without any worries. While he was in a good sleep, he did not know that at this moment, an unforeseen event that was related to him was happening in the sea of lava. At an unknown time of the day, an extremely strange warship floated over the sea of lava. The reason why it was strange was because the warship was actually modified from a floating rock island. The rough body of the ship looked ragged and did not have any sails. Tall figures could be seen on the ship. It was a group of tall stone golems that resembled stone puppets. Their entire bodies were pieced together from extremely hard granite. There were many huge cracks on its thick, 4-meter-tall body, and the scorching hot flames in its body spread out from these cracks, forming balls of terrifying flames of different colors on the surface of its body. The protective flames of the mature ones were golden, while the young ones were bright red. They had a humanoid body and 4 limbs, as well as an uneven head. However, their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose were not as orderly and smooth as humans. Instead, they looked more like a messy lump of stone. In the place of their eyes were 2 deep holes, and the light of magical gems could be vaguely seen in them. Their noses and ears were black beehives, while their mouths were cracks that stretched across their faces. If they were all opened, it would not be a problem to swallow a wild boar. The mysterious warship traversed through the viscous slurry of lava agilely, avoiding the larger floating islands. As for the smaller rocks, they did not avoid them and directly smashed them into pieces, allowing them to become debris floating on the sea of lava. From time to time, the tall giants on the ship bent down and reached their huge hands into the terrifyingly hot lava, scooping up magical gems or metal ores with a special elemental rhythm. For the guardians that patrolled the sea of lava, not everything could catch their eye. Every item they scooped up would be held in front of their eyes and carefully appraised. Only those with good quality would be thrown into the cabin. There, the bottom of the huge warship was already covered with a thick layer of spoils of war. As for the magical gems and metal ores of ordinary quality, the tall giants threw them back into the sea of lava, allowing them to melt into a part of the vast sea of lava. The sea of lava was like a gigantic furnace, depositing all the dregs and waste materials to the bottom and raising the most beautiful treasures to the surface of the sea, waiting for the children of the sea of flames to appear. As the children of the sea of fire that lived in the volcano world, the molten core giants were the natural rulers of this world. Not only did they have strong individual strength, but they also had extremely high intelligence and a relatively complicated social structure. There were 7 molten core giants on this warship, 2 of which were wizards and 5 of which were quasi-wizards. This meant that the basic configuration of a lava warship was 2 mature ones and 5 young ones. The entire nest of the molten core giants was on a ring-shaped island in the core of the sea of lava. To prevent human wizards from invading, they also formed 4 to 5 patrol teams that patrolled the sea of lava all day long. Usually, when a volcano was erupting, their life would be slightly peaceful. However, once the volcano entered a temporary rest period, as the water level of the sea of lava continued to drop, the many tunnels that led to their nest would be exposed. Every time this happened, it was usually the time when human wizards would send their minions into the volcano world. The many fire creatures on the periphery were deliberately driven out by the molten core giants to block the path of wizard apprentices. However, many times, some terrifying humans would still break into their home, steal the top-grade gourmet food, top-grade fire diamonds, that they had painstakingly collected, and kill their underage children. Therefore, during the temporary rest period of the volcano, the molten core giants would often be nervous and increase their patrol efforts. This time, when the lava warship slowly moved along the edge of the sea of lava, a tall molten core giant standing on the bow of the warship suddenly roared loudly. "Stop the warship! Stop the warship! I smell humans! Stop the warship and check!" With the efforts of the molten core giants, the lava warship stopped near a pile of rocks on the shore. Thump, thump, thump. A few heavy and tall figures leapt onto the shore and began to search for the scent and other clues left behind by the humans. Soon, the place where Grimm went into the sea and the place where he hid his clothes were found. "Arug, it seems that another human has broken into our world. What should we do?" A young molten core giant asked in a muffled voice. One of the two adult molten core giants rubbed his chin with a huge hand, and a thoughtful look appeared on his face. In the end, he said decisively, "Send someone to report to the elder and ask him to send more people. We'll leave 3 to find the whereabouts of that human. Since he could break through the fire beasts in such a short time, he must be someone with ulterior motives. We can't let him wander around our world." The other adult molten core giant said, "Then let me take 2 little guys. Those human wizards haven't invaded the sea of lava for many years. This time, it's very likely that it's another wizard apprentice. I can handle this kind of team." After the giant captain named Arug agreed, the molten core giant raised his huge hand that was surrounded by flames and shouted softly, "In the name of the great lord of lava, my slaves awaken." Following his loud roar, the heat waves in the sea of lava not far away surged. 20 to 30 strong lava hounds crawled out and crowded in front of him. "Go, my slaves, find that damned human for me." Hearing the command of the son of the sea of flames, these lava hounds raised their necks and let out a sharp howl, rushing into the complicated lava tunnels. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.